Hello and welcome to the 300th episode of the Weekly Stuff Podcast with Jonathan Lack
and Sean Chapman.
We are here to talk about stuff. This week on the show, we're here. It's the big one, Sean. It's episode 300. We have a lot on the docket. I have played a shit ton of games. There were a couple of pieces of news. We are going to do some episode 300 navel gazing and just talk about doing this for 8 years and answer some listener mail and hear from you guys. You guys sent in some really, really nice messages, so I'm excited to read those. And then for our big topic, we are doing a redux of our top 10 favorite TV shows of all time. Asterisk, no anime. We're saving anime for later.
Yes.
So we'll talk about that. But yes, Sean, for 200, we did our top 10 favorite movies. For 250, we did video games. So 300, it made sense. We're hitting the TV shows one again. I have honestly zero memory of the episode when we did this back in like year one. So my list I think is all new, or at least partially heavily new. I don't know. I didn't go back and look at my old one. So there you go.
I've got exciting news, Jonathan. I listened to those podcasts.
Really?
Yeah, well, I didn't listen to, it's like 4 hours, so I didn't listen to all, like, every single second of it, but yeah. I kind of skipped around to the juicy bits, so I have recompiled what our lists were. So once we get to when we start going to the TV show stuff, I will go over the discoveries I had about listening to a podcast that we recorded over 6 years ago.
Fuck.
Yeah, it was a long fucking time.
The only memory I have is that I think we did that as like a 3-parter because I was in Canada for a couple weeks, right?
No, that was a 2-part, but it was, I think you were in Portland for when we were doing part 2. So it was one where we recorded, we did it basically because you're going to be out of town. We're like, yeah, fuck it, let's just, because it was like episode like 37 and 38 or something, I think.
It was really early.
38, yeah, it's 38 and 39. So there's no particular reason, there was no reason for us to do a top 10 TV shows for those episodes. We just did, because why not?
Yeah.
I guess.
Sean, how do you feel about we are on the 300th episode of this crazy fucking thing?
I feel like a walking skeleton. I feel like, the world is dying and we are being left behind as rotting corpses in the dirt. I don't know how much of that is this is episode 300 and how much of that is me just spending a lot of time with teenagers who were born in the year 2005. And some like having a conversation a couple of weeks ago with a teenager who saw the Zack Snyder movie 300, which had come out when that person was 2 years old, and I was utterly horrified by that thought. And so that's where I am in life right now. That's what I'm thinking about.
I'm going to hit you with some stats, Sean.
Okay.
I do this on the milestones sometimes. All right. I threw every episode of this podcast into iTunes, which automatically tells you how long they are. Sean, would you like to hear how many hours of podcast we have recorded?
No, but I'm sure you're going to tell me anyways.
For the first 299 episodes, not counting bonuses, just the first 299, we did 789 hours of podcast, or more precisely, 32 days, 21 hours, 14 minutes, and 53 seconds of time, also known as over a month of you and I looking at each other talking about stupid, inane bullshit. If you add in our Doctor Who bonus episodes and Weekly Suit Gundam, that becomes 816 hours, or 34 days, 7 hours, 26 minutes, 2 seconds.
That's too much. That's too much time. It's just time, Jonathan.
I think, one thing people might think is that, you and I, Sean, are obviously friends. I wonder if people think, do we hang out, outside the podcast anymore? No, this is how we hang out. And the time kind of, justifies that, right?
Yes, yeah. That like most of the time we spend together is either doing the podcast stuff or something related to the podcast in some tertiary way.
Yeah.
So yeah, like it is. It's a tremendous quantity of time.
Yeah, it's
over the past
I remember
however many years.
You all know I'm a big Bruce Springsteen fan, and I remember someone asked Steven Van Zandt, who's the guitarist in the E Street Band, one time, like, you and Bruce are like best friends. How do you guys hang out these days? And he's like, what do you mean? We're on stage like every night. That's the only time we see each other. He's like, that's our hanging out, and it's great. We're doing what we love. We're playing music, but no, we don't fucking talk to each other off stage. And I feel like you and I, Sean, are like at that stage pretty much.
Yeah.
In our late 20s, not in our like mid 70s, but yeah, it's when you've spent a full month of your life talking about Doctor Who and Persona with someone. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get into the weeds, Sean. What have you been up to? Let's do some stuff.
I don't really have any major stuff. Like I've been doing a couple of things I'll probably talk about on the next normal podcast because it's just like little things I'm plugging away at. I did finish Control. That game is awesome. It has a great ending. There's a sequence near the end of that game that is something that I think like people are going to be talking about for a while, where it just is kind of like the that year when we had Titanfall 2 and Dishonored 2, and they both had like their like big set piece time travel levels. Control doesn't do a time travel thing, but it has a similar sort of like, this is a incredibly creative sort of set piece that I've never quite seen something executed in this way. Near the end of that game, and that is something that people who have played that game are going to be thinking about that sequence for a while, and it's something that people are going to bring up in the future, I think, in relationship to other kinds of like big kind of bonkers sort of psychedelic sort of sequences and set pieces in games. It's the sequence called the Ashtray Maze for people who have played the game. It's very, very good. And then while the main like A plot, like top level storyline in Control, I don't think ever is amazing, I do think like the world that they've built in the lore and the setting and the tone of Control remains so fascinating all the way throughout. So I'm extremely excited for the DLC stuff they're going to do next year, and kind of expanding. Like they leave the story in a really good spot for there to be a lot of cool DLC expanding on that world and the characters. And they kind of like very knowingly, I think they leave the main character in a position to facilitate more episodic kind of stories in smaller packages in the future. So that's like one of the main things I've done since the last podcast is finishing up Control, and kind of after I beat the main story, I went around and kind of mopped up everything, and I've basically 100% of that game. I don't think I quite have the platinum because there's a couple of like trophies that are a little bit too annoying to go out of my way to get, but I've done all the meaningful content in that game.
Awesome. Control is definitely at the top of my I will be looking for this on Black Friday and hoping to God I have time over break to play it, Yeah,
I think that's the kind of game it's going to become. I think it's going to be the kind of game that, because I don't think it got great sales so far, but I think it's the thing that's going to, like, once it goes on sale, like, word of mouth is going to propel that game to become, like, a kind of a cult hit, which is how most of Remedy's stuff typically goes.
Awesome. I have been playing a lot of games. I'm going to limit this for the purposes of a very busy episode, so, like, I've been very impressed with Apple Arcade. I'm not going to talk about that today. I want to save that for when I can dive into it a little bit more, and also when I've had time to play the games on Apple Arcade a little bit more. But I think that's a cool service. The internet is in love with Untitled Goose Game. Untitled Goose Game is really good, and I enjoy it. I have not played enough for me to feel like I would have anything to add to the discussion yet, other than, Sean, Untitled Goose Game is basically Hitman with a goose, and instead of killing people, you're annoying them as a goose. That's a pretty good pitch right there, I think. It's a cool game.
Yeah, I have not played Untitled Goose Game, but I have watched a video of it, and it seems amazing. Like, it seems like they put a lot of love and attention in animating that goose, and it looks like it's the right amount of love and attention.
Oh, I mean, there's, Sean, I think it might be like the right trigger, but there's one button that just extends the goose's wings and like flaps a little. From what I can tell, there's no gameplay purpose to it yet, but it's just so you can kind of express yourself as the goose and like extend your wings and honk so you look really angry. And I love that. There is a level of intention that's amazing. But the games I have been playing, Sean, I have beaten The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, the Nintendo Switch remake, and I am 5.5 hours in to Dragon Quest XI-S Echoes of an Elusive Age Definitive Edition on the Nintendo Switch, the hilariously long-titled port of Dragon Quest XI for the Nintendo Switch. So let me hit both of these. Link's Awakening is a stupendous remake. I don't know if I have anything more to say about the game that is Link's Awakening, because if you've played Link's Awakening, you've played most of what is in the remake. This is not a remake that expands upon it a lot. What it is it's a ground-up, aesthetic redo. So it's all new graphics. It's in 3D, still with a top-down perspective, although it's more sort of isometric instead of just straight top-down. And the graphics are just truly amazing. I was a little skeptical of the sort of toy box aesthetic when I first saw the game showed off earlier this year, but I think when you sit down and play the whole thing and really get to know the graphics, it is such a perfect, beautiful presentation of this weird, dreamlike video game that is literally about Link being, inside a dream and everything being kind of surreal. And I think they've managed to capture sort of the beautiful, wonderful fantasy and humor of that, and some of the also just weird off-kilter nature of it in this graphical presentation. And it is also just one of the most impressive technical feats on the Switch so far, because like Yoshi's Crafted World or Yoshi's Woolly World last generation on the Wii U, it's one of those Nintendo games that just looks real, like you're holding it in your hand or you've got it on your TV, and it looks like real, plastic trees and an actual little toy Link running around. And it is so, especially because it's running mostly at 60 frames per second, it's just got this verisimilitude that looks very tactile and tangible, and it feels like you could just fall into this world. And I think you take that, and you also take the new soundtrack, which is a fully orchestrated, live performed version, rearranged version of the original Link's Awakening soundtrack, which listeners will know is one of my 5 favorite soundtracks of all time, because we did that episode recently. And that soundtrack, it's just so amazing to hear it with real instruments, mostly as kind of a small chamber, so you hear a lot of soloists. And you put that all together, and it really does feel like you're playing the game for the first time again and rediscovering the magic of Koholint Island, which is, I think, one of the most magical locations in video gaming. It is this small, dense little world that there is so much packed into, and the remake really makes you appreciate what a rich world it is, what a beautiful story Link's Awakening tells, how smart the game is at telling you story in a very minimalistic fashion. It really does. It's a remake that takes everything that was good about Link's Awakening, enhances it, takes a lot of what was maybe more problematic about Link's Awakening, like being on the Game Boy and only having 2 buttons, and completely ameliorates all of that, takes away all the annoyances, and just makes you appreciate the game all the more. The ending hit me harder than it ever has, and I walked away really, really feeling like Link's Awakening is my favorite of the classical Zelda games. I would say this and Breath of the Wild are my 2 favorites in the series, and they both happen to be on Switch now, which is awesome. So Link's Awakening is great, with one asterisk. That chamber dungeons mechanic fucking sucks.
Yeah.
This is the thing where you go to Dompe's shack, which used to be the photo palace, and they took that out because there's no Game Boy printer on the Switch. So, it makes sense. Although, I kind of wish they had... There is a capture mechanic, so I kind of wish they had just done something like that. Because the chamber dungeons are an interesting idea. It is sort of like Mario Maker for Zelda, where you take all the different rooms from the dungeons and you can arrange them in different ways, and Dompe gives you sort of missions that are sort of like puzzles of how are you going to put the dungeons together in a way that works, and then you have to run through the dungeons. The problem is, it's the exact same rooms you've done in the main dungeons. Dungeons are built to be a thing that grows and builds on itself, and one room leads into the next, and there's a reason for it. So if you just take one room from one dungeon and one room from another and put them next to each other, it doesn't really feel like you're ever making progress in it. They're they're really grindy to run through. I think they're more fun to make in the level editor than they are to actually play, but you have to play them. And this would not bother me at all if they weren't so integrated into the main game. The problem is, if you're gonna 100% Link's Awakening, by that I mean get every seashell, get every heart piece, get full health, all of that, you have to play a lot of the chamber dungeons. and I got to a point where I had 1 heart left, and I would have to play a whole nother round of chamber dungeons, which is like 4 or 5 missions, and do all of that and grind for an hour and a half. And I'm like, fuck it, I'm going to beat the game with 19 hearts. I don't actually need 20 hearts. It's not that hard a game. I'm fine with 19 hearts. I wanted to have 20 hearts just to say I 100%ed it, but I do not like these chamber dungeons, so I'm going to ignore it. I think if the chamber dungeons were just a separate thing that you could completely ignore, I would say, okay, I think that was a failed experiment, but I'm glad they took the swing because it's an interesting thing to try, and it's okay to try and fail once in a while. But the fact that they're so integrated, like there's a lot of little rewards added in the game that are related to the chamber dungeons, like there's more seashells now. And in the original game, the reward for getting all the seashells was you get basically the covalent version of the Master Sword, which can like send out a beam when you have full health. That was awesome to get. Now you get that about halfway through getting the seashells, and the top seashell reward is just another piece for the fucking chamber dungeon. And it's like it was such a letdown when I realized that. So if they could release a DLC patch that is just with the game with chamber dungeons or without, and they like just put the heart pieces somewhere else, that would be fantastic. Otherwise, this is an A+ remake, and I love it.
Awesome.
Yeah. Dragon Quest XI-S is a motherfucker. That Dragon Quest XI, you all know, is one of my favorite games in recent memory. It was my favorite game of 2018, and I inexplicitly put it at number 2 because I got into my own head and freaked myself out. But it was my favorite game of last year, and now it is on Nintendo Switch. I have played, like I said, 5 or 6 hours, and it's so good. They have, I think people probably already know a lot of what they've added, but just to recap, the game now has fully orchestrated music. You can choose the original MIDI tracks that were in the PS4 version, but it defaults to the symphonic version, which is absolutely gorgeous. You can very much, like, it is big and brassy and full of strings, and it's fantastic. There are some different graphical swaps. So, for instance, like now, your party follows behind you on the field, which they did not do in the original version, which is good, because in every other Dragon Quest, your party is with you on the field. So now that is fixed. They are on the field with you. There is full voice acting in the Japanese version of the game. There was voice acting if you played it in English last year. I did not, because Square Enix dubs make me break out in hives. But now there is a full Japanese cast to Dragon Quest XI, and because it is Dragon Quest, they were able to get the best of the best. You will just immediately start recognizing voices because it's all anime A-listers. Eric/Kamu in Japanese is his name. He's played by the guy who voices Banaji in Mobile Suit Unicorn Gundam, which is just I was like, wait, it's that, I love that guy, and it was great. And there's lots of other ones. There's a demon who, I swear to God, sounds like he's voiced by Shigeru Chiba. I don't think it's Shigeru Chiba, but I can't find like the full cast list for like this one random demon. But it's definitely someone doing like a Shigeru Chiba impression at the very least. So it's a phenomenal cast, and it's really cool to have there. And they also have not overdone it. This is not Fire Emblem Three Houses. We are going to voice every last goddamn line of dialogue in this game, whether you want it or not. They have voiced where you need voicing, and they have left it quiet and left you in fucking peace and quiet when you want to be left in peace and quiet. But the voice acting really adds a whole new dimension to the game. There is an entire 2D mode where you can play the game in 16-bit like it's a Super NES Dragon Quest game, and that I only played the first like half hour that way to kind of see what it was like. I played the first half hour like both ways, and I really want to do a third playthrough of this game sometime entirely in 16-bit mode, because it's really cool. It's basically, I would consider it a second game. It is not, it is not built in such a way where you can seamlessly swap between them, like graphics on the Master Chief Collection or something. It is a separate experience, and it is a complete faithful recreation of the game, just if it were in 16-bit, and it is very cool to see. It's beautiful to look at, and I am excited to play around with that more at some point. And then there's tons of other little changes under the hood. You can adjust the speed of battles. You can call your horse in the field when you're not at the little bell now. You can do the fun-sized forge anywhere in the game, not just at campsites. There are just tons and tons of things they have added and tweaked. One of the weird little things I've noticed is that in Cobblestone, the town you start in, there are a bunch of pumpkins around the town now. I don't know what they're there for, but you can run into them and break them, and they make a very like meaty pumpkin sound. So there's just weird little things they've added like that. And it is a slight graphical downgrade of the PS4 version, But I think if you played the PS4 version, you will be astonished how good it looks on Switch, because it is almost there. The difference is that there is now some graphical pop in, and there is a little less anti-aliasing, so there's more jagged edges. And that's kind of it. Like, maybe some lower quality textures here and there, but it looks like Dragon Quest XI. It sounds like Dragon Quest XI, but better because they've added a lot of audio stuff. If you play it in handheld mode, it frankly looks just like the PS4 version shrunk down. You'll really only notice the problems if you blow it up to a TV. And yeah, it is definitely the definitive version of the game. There's a lot of really cool stuff about it, and I am rediscovering just how much I love this fucking video game. It is amazing, and I am excited to play through more of it, because there's also a bunch of added story content later in the game that I obviously have not gotten to yet. And I'm so excited to start getting party members and hear their voices, because the one I have so far is Eric Camus, and I am so excited to hear who else they have gotten for the other characters. It's so cool.
So how is having people in Japanese say things that is not the names of the things in English? How is your stepping into my hell talking about that game on the podcast?
You know, I'm dealing with it. It's become kind of a fun game for me in the cutscenes where, like, it's taking me longer to play through it this time because they have, because they're voiced cutscenes, the cutscenes just take longer to play out, right? Mm-hmm. And so while that's going on, I will read the subtitles very quickly, and then the voice will go, and I'll be listening, and I am very intentionally trying to listen for the differences. So I've been able to spot most name differences by ear, and then I have made for myself a little spreadsheet of name differences just so I can keep track of it, and I looked some up for later. But yes, it is definitely confusing. I forgot. So my brother Thomas is playing this over in Japan, and I told him, play it in Japanese, but then I forgot to warn him, every proper noun is different. And so he's like, why doesn't anyone have their name? And I'm like, okay, this is why. Eric is Camus, Hendrik is Greg. There's a lot of weird things.
Greg.
Yeah, it's... So it's fine, because honestly, otherwise, it's a pretty accurate translation. Like, they have punched it up in terms of, the Dragon Quest localization staff likes to add their accents and some of their little regional variants, but it is very faithful to the word of what they're, to the idea of what they're saying. This is not a Final Fantasy 15 thing where, like, in Japanese they're talking about driving the car, and in English they're making puns about the sea or something, Mm-hmm. It's not that. It is not that different. It's mostly the proper nouns will confuse you, but it's a fun way to keep me on my toes while I'm playing the game a second time,
Awesome, yeah.
I said this on Twitter. I wish they would, if they sold this for $5, I would buy it. The Control F localization pack, where they just Control F every instance of Eric and put in Camus and then did the same for every other name, that would be fantastic to have, because it would be less distracting, but it's okay. I can deal with it.
Yeah, I do wish that they would, either as a patch or like a piece of like small paid DLC, maybe not everything, but it is frustrating having like small things like the fun-sized forge or whatever, being able to use that anywhere, or calling the horse. Like, those are the kinds of improvements that you wish would trickle down into base versions of the game and not be like weirdly sectioned off into this definitive edition that is only available on one platform. Like, that is a frustrating, like, I get if it's the more substantive content, I like don't think that's a big deal. It's the smaller, like speeding up the battle kind of stuff is the kind of stuff that I wish that they would either if it's paid or it was free, whatever, like trickle down into other versions of the game as well.
Because you played the original Japanese version, because we should say Dragon Quest XI S is the third version of the game. Well, fourth, actually, because it launched in Japan on PS4 and 3DS, so that's two versions. You played the PS4, so that's the vanilla version that has no running, and a lot of other little things missing that they added into the North American international version last year, and then now S for Japan is where they got all the North American stuff, plus all the new additions. So it has been kind of a weird winding path for the game.
Yeah, is there an option in Dragon Quest XI's Definitive Edition to do the original Japanese release menus that just look like Dragon Quest menus and not their weird fancy menus they put in the North American version?
The 2D version is all original menus.
Okay.
Not in the 3D, but in the 2D, it's very classical. It even has the first-person combat, like in the original games.
Awesome. Yeah, because that was the one change of things that they changed for the North American release. I was like, yes, at least I have this. At least I have way better looking, old school ass looking, just black and white Dragon Quest menus, and everybody else has like their weird Game of Thrones like burned parchment menus or whatever the fuck they did.
Two last things, Sean. First, if you are playing this game a second time, 100% before you start, there is the difficulty menu called Draconian Quest. There's an option called Townsfolk Talk Tripe that you have to turn on, because what it does is as you go through the game, NPCs at random will just tell you outrageous lies. Like, oh my god, the dark spawn is standing behind you, or something like that. That's a pretty mundane one. They get a lot sillier. Those are hilarious. Turn those on, especially if you're playing it a second time. And second, Sean, I have not gotten this far in the game, but this game will be eligible for the Miyuki Sawashiro Award for Peculiar Excellence, because she's in this fucking game now as Crystalinda, the weird ice witch in the town, in Ice Town. Yeah! When I saw that, because I looked at the cast list of who they had announced for like major roles, and I'm like, yep, they got it. They got it. Akio Otsuka is also in this game later on. Like, they went to fucking town. Like, it's Dragon Quest. They could get whoever they wanted.
Good, yes. That is the right character for Sawashiro-san to play. That's good. That's good to know.
All right. So those are the games I've been playing. They also did finally put out Dragon Quest 1, 2, 3 on Switch. Those versions have been on PS4 and 3DS for years. They're finally on Switch now, and they're even on Switch in English. I bought Dragon Quest 1. It is basically the mobile port of the game. Looks a little nicer. It's, it's on your full TV. It's in widescreen, all of that. You can use your buttons. Those aren't necessarily the best ever versions of the games. I think the best ever versions are probably the Super NES versions that have never come out anywhere else. But these are definitely nice, and they're really cheap. Dragon Quest 1 is $5, Dragon Quest 2 is $6, and Dragon Quest 3 is $12. So you can get the whole set for like around $25. And if you need more Dragon Quest in your life, those are really fucking good games. So at least play 3. 3, especially 3, has the closest link to 11. So I'm glad those are there now.
Yes, and like play 1 and 3 and maybe 2 as a curiosity. If you play 2, 100% play 2 with a FAQ, because that is not a game you just want to play.
No.
Play naked.
I like 2, and I think there's a lot of cool things about it, but just that one there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You need a guide for it. You won't figure it out on your own.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anyway, that's the stuff. Sean, you want to hit a couple pieces of news?
Yeah, what's going on in the news, Jonathan?
So Sony had one of their Days of Play events this week, and they did a big section on The Last of Us Part 2, the next game from Naughty Dog. And they announced it will be launching on February 21st, 2020. It will be so big, it is a 2-disc Blu-ray game. It will not have multiplayer. They have decided to cut that for now, but Naughty Dog did release a statement implying Factions, the multiplayer mode of The Last of Us, may return as a standalone product down the line. They also released a new trailer for The Last of Us 2, and I also just have to make fun of them for a second for going absolutely batshit crazy with special editions for this game, because even though this is a single-player only game, with no real content that you can add in the form of like DLC and stuff, there are 4 editions: standard $60 edition, $80 special edition, $150 collector's edition, and $200-something Ellie edition. The special edition, which is the $80 one, all it gives you is a steelbook, a 48-page excerpt of a bigger art book coming out the same day for its own cost, a digital PSN theme, and a few in-game unlocks of ammo and stuff, which I wouldn't want in The Last of Us 2, because that's would be weird to just break the immersion and be like, oh, thank God I got all this extra ammo from the PlayStation gods. So yeah, they are trying to price gouge you. Just buy the standard edition. You don't need that other stuff. But I understand it was probably a very, very expensive game to develop. So there you go, Sean. What do you think about everything we saw for The Last of Us Part 2?
I like having a release date. Like, it feels like they're very confident about it, so I don't imagine that the game is going to slip. Like, I think the trailer was good, if like not amazing, because it just kind of feels like Naughty Dog does not want to give too much about the game, and so it just kind of feels like they're playing their cards really close to their chest, which is good, but it means that like the trailer is like, I strongly suspect that most of the stuff in that trailer is not actually like what's going to happen in the game based on how like light the trailer is cut. Like there's a lot of like implication in the trailer without showing you anything, which makes me think that they're probably like half the stuff of that trailer is probably not actually what the stuff that's going to happen in the game, which makes it like hard to get super excited just because there's nothing like solid to hold on to from that trailer. And most of my excitement of Last of Us 2 is still more from the gameplay demo we got like 2 E3s ago. Is more like I'm really excited for the game. Nothing they showed at this event like necessarily kind of pushed my excitement one way or the other.
I agree with all of that. My worry continues to be just about the game getting too bleak. And like I know that's a weird thing to say about The Last of Us. The Last of Us is an extraordinarily bleak game. It's also a game with a lot of humanity and heart beating through it the entire time, and a lot of humor in a lot of places. There was that trailer they did years ago that with the Laura Bailey character that's just 4 minutes of sadistic violence, and that rubbed me the wrong way. This trailer, I agree with you, Sean. It is very disjunctive editing that I think even odds whether or not it will be in the game or not. But this trailer implies that the girl that Ellie has a crush on, or is like her love interest best friend, gets killed, and that's why Ellie goes on her revenge quest. And I did a Twitter thread about I don't need to see another zombie story that sort of indulges in what is called the bury your gays plot trope, which is gay couples can never be happy because one of them has to get murdered. And they've already done that to Ellie in Left Behind, so that would feel repetitive to me. But I agree. Overall, I trust Naughty Dog. Since the advent of the PS3, they have not made anything less than a pretty stellar game, and they are also pretty goddamn good at writing these characters and figuring this shit out. So I want to experience the game for myself. I think the marketing has been underwhelming on that trailer level because, for the exact reason you identify, Naughty Dog doesn't want to tell us anything about this game. And that's fine. That's their prerogative, and I like it. But at this point, I'm kind of like, okay, I don't want to hear anything more about this game. Let's get to February. Let's put our 2 Blu-ray discs in, because that is becoming the standard, it seems like.
Yep.
We are at that point in the generation, and it's going to last for the entire next generation, too. So, yeah, let's see how this goes. I'm definitely excited. What do you think about the multiplayer thing?
I really loved the multiplayer in Last of Us 1, so I was excited to see what it was going to be into, because forever ago, back around the time when Part 2 was announced, they said they were going to have multiplayer. So it's a little bit of a bummer to be like, I feel like The Last of Us multiplayer was not a thing that a bunch of people played, but the people that did get into it, like me, really got into it, because it is a very unique style of multiplayer, and especially at the time in 2013, which was when competitive multiplayer shooters were incredibly homogenized. It was before you had stuff like Overwatch and Fortnite and PUBG and all the stuff we have now, that like there's such a variety of different kinds of multiplayer games. Back then it was like, would you play Call of Duty? Did you play Gears of War? Did you play Halo? And those are all like the multiplayer shooters that kind of existed, and they're all on a broad scope fairly similar. And The Last of Us was really unique among that crowd. So I'm really excited to see like what a spun off version of the multiplayer mode could be. Like I'm curious to see like, is that going to be a DLC kind of add-on for The Last of Us Part 2, or are they going to take those ideas and spin it off into kind of more of its own game? I'm curious to see where those ideas go, but I'm definitely still a little bit bummed that I'm not going to be able to play that multiplayer when the game comes out.
Yeah, I think this is smart if they really do follow through and do a standalone thing, because I think Naughty Dog's multiplayer has always been really good. Like, the Uncharted 4 multiplayer is fantastic, but I played it more than most people probably, but I didn't play it a ton, and I think that's because it's paired with a campaign that's the star of the show. This is not Halo, this is not Call of Duty. The star of the show is the campaign. The multiplayer kind of rightfully feels like an also-ran, and so when you put it there, I think people kind of miss it, or even if you don't want to miss it, you just wind up kind of overlooking it because it's not the star attraction of the package. And I think possibly doing a spun-off factions thing later on is a lot smarter in terms of giving it the full attention and care it probably needs to be the best multiplayer suite it can be to draw in a lot of people, and also to get the attention it needs to last and like foster a community. I think that makes sense. I also have to imagine they were trying to make a battle royale for this fucking game. Right?
It's possible, yeah. Like, I think that would be that would be a huge undertaking. Like, if that's what they were trying to do, then absolutely, then it should be spun off to its own thing, because that would be way too labor intensive for Naughty Dog to invent how to do a battle royale on their tech.
Exactly. And I don't have any sources on this. It's just my prediction, and it feels like that would, I think, work with how they did factions. I think that would actually be a really interesting, like, gritty version of it. So I'm excited to see. You know, I assume they did not put out that statement lightly, and I assume they have some kind of long-term plan. I don't think they just said that on a whim. So I'm excited to see where it goes. Like you, I'm a little bummed we won't get it right away, but this fucking campaign apparently takes up 100 gigabytes. So it's probably a long one, right? And Last of Us was already their longest game, so I'm very excited to see what they do with it.
Yeah, because that's another reason why it feels like when I look at those trailers, I'm just like, I don't know if I can take anything away from these trailers, is because at the same event, they were just saying, like, yeah, this is on 2 Blu-rays. It's the longest game we've made. Like, it sounds like the scope of The Last of Us Part 2 is bigger than what The Last of Us 1 was, which was already still their biggest game. And so, yes, like, if like the scope of the Last of Us 2 campaign is that much bigger than what we normally expect from a Naughty Dog game, then it would make sense that they would try to focus their resources on that and not try to have another team on the side working on that multiplayer stuff.
Absolutely. All right, let's go on to our next piece of news, Sean. This week, Sony and Marvel, or Sony and Disney, we should say, announced that they had made nice. They have agreed to produce a third standalone Sony-produced Spider-Man film set in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, plus another appearance by Spidey in a Disney-produced MCU film, both to be produced by Kevin Feige. The new Spider-Man movie will come out July 16th, 2021. According to Deadline, Disney actually came back to the table on this after Tom Holland gave that kind of emotional appearance at the D23 Expo, and Disney moved their offer down from a 50-50 co-financing co-profit split to a 25-75, with Sony still maintaining the bulk of production costs and profits, and it seems like that finally worked out for everybody. And so we can all breathe easily, Sean. We will have our third MCU Spider-Man film. They can finish the story. We can get Kraven the Hunter, played by Hugh Jackman, because Kevin Feige is crazy enough to do it. I'm excited. I assume you're excited.
Yes. Finally, Spider-Man: Home is Where the Heart Is can become a reality. It's the dream's not over yet. Like, as I said on the podcast when the news first broke about the split, like, I don't need a million Tom Holland Spider-Man movies in the MCU. Like, I don't think they need to keep that character, like, in that forever. But after the way that Far From Home ended, I need at least this one. You gotta give me this one. Like, we deserve it. We as a people have been through a lot of bullshit in the world recently, so give us this fucking Spider-Man movie that pays off the ending of Far From Home. I just need it, please.
Absolutely, I think, and I think that's the biggest thing. If Far From Home had ended in a less cliffhangery way, I don't think the pressure would have been there for Sony and Marvel, or Sony and Disney, to, like, do all the negotiating. But I think the fact that they dropped the J. Jonah Jameson mic at the end and did the reveal of Peter's face and all that, like, you have to do it. You have to go further. You have to have Happy Hogan react to it. You have to have other Marvel characters in the mix to react to it. Spider-Man was too important, and now it will work better for everyone, because Sony will get another $1 billion Spider-Man movie. Disney will get a little bit of those profits, but more importantly, they will get to advertise Tom Holland in a future Marvel movie, which I'm excited to see what that is, because they do not have an Avengers movie on the immediate horizon, so I'm excited to see where he shows up. I think it's good news. It's good it happened. It's not particularly surprising. These companies like to negotiate in public, so the temper tantrum is over. And and I say temper tantrum on both sides because it's not one or the other. All the people just blaming Sony do not understand how power dynamics of Hollywood work, because Sony did not have the power here. Let's be very fucking clear. So but it's done. We will get more. That's good. Tom Holland posted a crazy video about it that was very funny. Yeah. So you were there. It's good.
It's good. We're good. It's good. We get our Spider-Man movie. I'm happy.
We Sean, this is a good week to do episode 300. We got our Spider-Man movie. Trump's getting impeached. Everything's coming up, America.
For right now, for this snapshot. Hopefully this podcast will not age terribly.
I know. Knock on wood.
Yeah.
But yes. All right. Anywho, let's go ahead and move on, Sean. It's episode 300. We've done a lot of podcasting. Let's talk about it a little bit. I want to get into some listener mail, and I want to answer some listener questions, because, again, people sent in some pretty good stuff. And I have some questions that I just thought would be fun for us to go back and forth on. But I guess, Sean, we should also just, 300 feels like a really big milestone. I think it is a big milestone. What are your thoughts right now on having done the podcast for this long, on, I don't know, what we've learned about podcasting? I wanted to know if there's any navel-gazing we should do right now.
I mean, like, one thing that immediately springs to mind is that, like, while this is episode 300 of this podcast, it's really not, because, one, we had our precursor podcasts. We had the Monthly 10 podcast and the Monthly Stuff, which turned into the Monthly Stuff, which then turned into WGTC Radio, which morphed into Weekly Stuff, which is kind of like, we fused those together. So,
yes.
Those episodes all count. But we do have several episodes that are from this version of the podcast. And then we have all of our bonus podcasts because we just can't help ourselves. So calling it 300 feels slightly disingenuous from the actual reality of the full scope of podcasting that we have actually done.
No, yeah, we have like 330 episodes in the feed. So this is our 300th numbered episode. But there are obviously all the bonuses and all. So yeah, it's arbitrary. It was always going to be a little arbitrary. If you turn back the clock far enough, we started doing this in 2011, you and I, with a microphone. So it's basically been this entire decade.
Because it started with us in high school, and we have now both graduated college and are then working, and you're getting a PhD, and I'm working as a high school teacher. So it's a big gap of time.
Yes, you are teaching the people who were your age when we started this, which just makes me want to go jump in a lake.
Yeah, exactly, yes. That's the reality I am faced with every single day.
I'll say, but I've been doing it for so long. I love doing this podcast. If I didn't, we wouldn't be doing it. I hope that speaks for itself. If we came on here every week and, Sean, you were like, God damn it, Jonathan, I don't want to do another fucking podcast, this wouldn't really work, right?
Yeah, no. We only do it for the massive quantities of money that this podcast brings in. That's the only reason. We're still chained to just, like, the billions we're making from the podcasting business.
You guys don't know it, but Atlas pays us a lot under the table to talk about Persona.
Yeah, that's the reason why we didn't like season 11 of Doctor Who's, because they stopped paying us. So we started giving the bad reviews. That's how it worked.
I know, that Peter Capaldi guy fucking sucked. Now we can finally say it. Just a no-talent hack.
But deep pockets.
Deep pockets, yes. I'll just say I can't imagine my life without the podcast at this point. It is how I process so much of, like, the media I consume. It's why I consume a lot of the media I consume. It's how a lot of my biggest adult fandoms have come about. And it's a project that, for me at least, keeps me sane throughout the week, because it is this other creative outlet that is not tied to my employment or other things that, like, on one level, I would love if this podcast made us a lot of money, Sean. It's also kind of nice sometimes that it doesn't, because that pressure's just gone. We do it because we like it, and I think if I've learned anything from 10 years of obsessive podcasting, it's good to have a hobby like this that is weirdly obsessive. I don't know, do you agree? Does it help keep you sane?
No, absolutely, because it does. One of the main things that it's done, because again, we have been doing this podcast all throughout us in college and then now in our post-college lives. Like, it has made me like a substantively better critical thinker and consumer of media, because having a focused time every week to spend 2 to 4 hours, depending on the stupid length of time we choose to spend on something, spending that time to like critically discuss something, like I would not be able to do some of the stuff I do as a high school English teacher were it not for the skills developed on this podcast, right? Like,
it's made me a better teacher. I'll say that.
Yeah. Just being able to riff on a piece of media and hear different perspectives and work off of other perspectives and build off of those in conversation and dialogue. Like, that's so much of what you have to do, whether that's like me teaching a lesson or me having to sort of intervene with some sort of behavioral issue in the hallway. This, like, the podcast stuff, that kind of focused critical discussion of something, that skill is transferable to a lot of different things.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's I've got a couple of things to throw at you, Sean. Do you have, I'm going to phrase this broadly.
Okay.
Favorite episode, and if not individual episode, like project, topic, thing we have done. And it could be as broad as like just one thing we recurrently talk about, or as narrow as one time we've done it. I don't know how we want to take this.
I mean, sort of in recent memory, I think, because I think like this has been a very good year so far for this podcast. I think all the Gundam stuff we've done, I've really, really deeply enjoyed. Particularly, I think our wrap up for Mobile Suit Gundam with the movies and then the Char's Counterattack podcast, I think, are great. I love our Game of Thrones podcast we did. Like, I think that's like one of the most fun podcast recording experiences I've had, where it was just an unreasonable thing to do. We basically like tacked it on to an end of a podcast recording late at night.
Sean, I have listened to that episode in its entirety twice, and what I love about it is our loopiest episode, and I remember none of it from the recording, so it is like listening to other people, because I have no idea what I was saying, and it is such a weird out-of-body experience. There's no other podcast like that for me, where I just have no memory of talking about it.
Yes, yeah, it's the same thing for me, because that is one of the few podcasts that I ended up listening to all the way through, just because it was just like fucking... Yeah, like half of it I didn't remember, and the other half of it I remembered thinking it was very funny when we were recording it, and then I listened back to it, it's like, yeah, this is fucking funny. This is a good podcast. So in recent memory, it would be those. Going back further, I mean, for when, like, all of being able to do Peter Capaldi's Doctor Who stuff, like, I think that was tremendously rewarding on this podcast. Same thing with Twin Peaks. Any of those, like, longer... like weekly deep dives we could do in a TV show that was really, really good. Like, those are some of the best podcast stuff that we had, and just like that was always super rewarding. And then of course there's our great magnum opus, the Persona 5 podcast, which must stand on the hill, the shining beacon of our podcast, is and forever will be our ludicrous, absurd Persona 5 podcast shit we did.
And honestly, if I had to, because I agree with everything you're saying, I love all this stuff too. If I had to point to one era of the podcast I'm kind of proudest of, or I remember most fondly, it is spring 2017, which is where we simultaneously were reviewing Doctor Who Season 10, Twin Peaks The Return, and Persona 5. I think we both sometimes forget, Sean, that was all simultaneous. There were weeks where we were doing Doctor Who, Persona, and Twin Peaks, and like, that's never going to happen again. Like, how will the stars ever align to give us those three? Those are three of our meatiest things we've ever had to talk about. It would be, the only way would be if we had decided to start doing Mobile Suit Gundam, and then three things like that started happening, and we wouldn't have been able to keep up with it. So like, that's just one era I'm very, very proud of. Individual episodes, I agree with all those. I really like a lot of our recent retrospectives we've done. Yeah. So, like, Lord of the Rings was very rewarding because we're both big Lord of the Rings fans. But honestly, podcasts I recommend to people a lot are our Star Wars prequel ones. And I wish more people would listen to those and talk about them, because in terms of doing something where I think we were out of lockstep with a lot of, like, the critical community, I'm really proud of those, because I think I learned a lot about myself, I feel like, in a weird way, revisiting these movies that I feel like I had kind of been peer pressured into dismissing, and finding that there was a lot more to them, you know?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. That, like, especially with how, like, intense the Star Wars discourse is these days, being able to reclaim those movies felt really good. And then now, I mean, like, it felt really good, but then now I'm also in a weird place where then I see people diss the prequels online, and I get mad about it, because it's like, fucking... Like, because it is, like, the people trotting out the same tired cliche criticisms about those movies 10 plus years later just gets exhausting when it's like, well, no, like, that's not, like, not to say that I disagree with a lot of those criticisms, but I think the magnitude of their impact on the movies is so ridiculously overblown. And so it's on the one thing I can go back to those movies now, and I can have them, and I can hold them, and I can love them. But then now that means that I have these precious babies that the world hates and is always attacking. So it's sort of a mixed bag, but I'm glad that we did it.
I've got a life-size Jar Jar doll in the corner that talks. I mean, Sean, you can see it in the webcam every week. We don't talk about it. I find it a little embarrassing, but I feel like I can finally admit it. Hey, Jar Jar.
Yeah. I'm worried that maybe that Jar Jar doll is haunted because sometimes it waves when we're podcasting, but it's probably fine.
Only when it disagrees.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and then, okay, two other favorites I want to point out is, I think it's episode 60 was our Persona 3 episode when we did our big Persona 3 review and discussion, and that will always just be one of my favorites. It's from the bad audio quality days. We were, in that case, holed up in your room for some reason.
Yep.
Oh, it's because you had a different roommate at the time, so we were kind of... But it was a weird recording session, but it was also like that game was so rewarding to talk about, and it was so fresh, for both of us. And then all four of our reviews of the Persona 3 movies. I'm really happy we did those when they were coming out, and we did them... Because basically for all four, we watched it together, and then we podcasted, and it was just... Those were all very fun, and I enjoy those ones as well.
Yeah, the Persona 3 movie ones are great. Another sort of more recent podcast memory, and this is a good example of where, like, having the podcast is so useful, is for weird shit like when this happens, of when I discovered the Rock Reflections of a Superhero album, and it was such a treat, it was such a delicious treat for that to fall into my lap and be like, if this was just my life and I didn't have the podcast, like, I could show this to some friends and, like, joke around about it. But it's not like being able to go do a deep dive about it on the fucking podcast and then end up having, like, that entire album end up being theme songs of different episodes.
We got one left. We got one song left we haven't used.
It's that Rock Reflections of a Superhero album, like, it was just such a delicious discovery of, yes, this is such just primo fucking content for the podcast in a way that I love. That nobody, like, that's one of the things that's fun about doing this podcast. It is something that's going to come up when we do our fucking TV show list on mine. I could guarantee it. Is you end up being able to say things or talk about things that nobody in the world is talking about. Nobody in the world is talking about this fucking weird 70s rock album about Spider-Man. Nobody in the world is going to put a certain TV show that nobody listening to this has fucking heard of above some of the most famous TV shows in the world on their list. And that's the kind of shit that's fun to do on this podcast, is be like, oh, fuck it. Like, this is who we are. This is the shit that we really like. And that's how we're going to talk about it. So screw it. Like, we'll spend this much time talking about a weird 70s rock album about Spider-Man because it's great.
Abso-fucking-lutely. And I will also say there, if you haven't heard the Pokemon Christmas Bash episode, which was our Christmas episode last year, where I was in town and I just played samples for a incredulous Sean who had never heard this album, that was a lot of fun. I want to do something like that again someday, because it's one of the more experimental episodes we've done. It's not our normal format, and it was a blast.
Yeah. And now that I'm, like, thinking about specific podcast memories, I think maybe my all-time favorite podcast memory is at the end of, I don't know what episode it was, but the end of the episode where I revealed to you that I was playing through Persona 5 in Japanese.
And you can hear my heart break. You can just hear it shatter.
Oh, that was a good one. Like, it's again, having little moments like that, dude, like being able to be like me, like, not being able to resist it, me getting Persona 5 and playing it in Japanese on my PS4 and being like, I could just text Jonathan about this right now, which is a thing that any sane person would do, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to play this game for like 2 weeks and get deep enough in, and then I'm going to talk about it on the podcast.
I mean, you and I never text. We save everything for this because it's more.
Yeah.
If we just texted these things, it wouldn't be as entertaining. So, like, I love. Someday I should just release our text logs, because it's literally every week. It's like podcast on Sunday. Yeah, normal time.
Yeah.
Yep, good.
Sure. Yep.
It looks like it's two people who really don't like each other.
Yeah, it's like, it'll be the occasional, like, do you want to do Gundam and this podcast at the same time? It's like, oh, do we want to talk about this news thing? Usually it's like, normal time, yep. And then it's like that, like, 5 times in a row.
Yes, it's great. We've got a good thing going. But yeah, yes, I love all of that. In terms of recent stuff also, I love the transformation on Weekly Suit Gundam from a show where you are 100% in the driver's seat to I am going crazy and I have hijacked the car, and like there are moments where you can just hear Sean getting, I think, worried for my sanity.
Like, that podcast is so much fun to do because I like how it no longer makes sense that I'm the host of that podcast.
I know.
Like, past episode 5, I should not even be the host of the podcast anymore because it's so self-driven by your like Gundam fever that I've infected you with. But I like that I'm still the host of the podcast because I just get introduced to it, and then you go insane talking about like the 5 Gundam manga that you had just read.
Exactly. All right. Least favorite episode. Let's get dark for a moment.
Oh, geez. The one from forever ago that I wasn't on. This is like...
Oh, this isn't even a Weekly Stuff episode.
Yeah, that's like monthly 10 or something. Like,
yeah.
This is like the 6th episode or something of the monthly 10 that I wasn't on. That's definitely it was the Harry Potter one.
Yep.
So, of course, I wasn't on it. But that's easily the worst one. I would say the bonus podcast you did with Thomas, but that one was actually very funny. So I wasn't on that one, but it gets my approval. Mostly because it was a Thomas cast.
Yes, it was, and those ones I don't, it's not a full numbered episode, so like it doesn't fully count. Yeah, I mean, someone asked about the history of the podcast, so I'll tell the story in full later. The overall project did not necessarily start as a you and me thing, and that's why there are ones from the pre-Weekly Stuff days without you. But obviously, by the time it became WGTC Radio, and even by the time it was the monthly stuff, it was 100% like, yeah, why would I be doing this with someone else? That'd be weird.
Yeah.
So yeah. My least favorite episode, by far, it's at 100% the worst one we've ever put out, is the Man of Steel episode from back in the day. That is a awful episode of this podcast because it is the most you and I talking past each other. We weren't talking to each other, and I take the blame for it. I put some blame on you. We were just in very different places on that movie. Ultimately, I think you were right. Is the thing that I have to say now.
History has definitely borne out my opinion. Yes.
Oh, 100%. But we didn't want to have the actual... Because there are plenty of episodes where we've disagreed on things, and it often leads to really good discussions. It's not like you and I can't disagree. That was just one where, like, we weren't in the same place, and it was a bad, awkward, uncomfortable discussion.
Yeah, and I think that there are, like me going through occasionally and listening to the early podcasts now that we're doing these more retrospective-y kind of ones, when we're redoing the list. Like, it does, like, I do notice that we could end up being much more combative in those early podcasts when we were, like, 19 and 20.
Yes.
And Man of Steel is sort of like that as well, I think, for the podcast. And there's a moment when... in our top 10 TV shows where we're talking about Dragon Ball, where that was the point where I hadn't seen Japanese Dragon Ball yet. I had seen the original Dragon Ball. I was watching through the original Dragon Ball in Japanese, had not quite worked my way up to normal Dragon Ball Z, and I was talking about how it was hard for me to just switch to Japanese voices in Dragon Ball Z because it was hard for me to do the Goku voice switch between having Sean Schimmel and Masuko Nozawa, which are two very different sounding performances, because Masuko Nozawa is a woman and her voice is much higher than Sean Schimmel's. And so me talking about that, and you were very, very ardent. Yes, and so and then that pushed me to go more extreme in my opinion, and then me going more extreme in my opinion pushed you more extreme. I think we're much better because we're adults and more sane people. We can reach compromises and kind of figure out where each other is coming from. And sometimes in those early podcasts, it was much harder for us to sort of find that more reasonable ground in the discussion, and we would push each other's buttons a bit too much. It
was like the Man of Steel thing. I was right, but I was being a dick about it.
I was right, and I was definitely being a dick about it too.
Yes, but I think, and actually that leads to one other thing I've learned from this podcast. I think I'm a significantly better listener today than I was back then. And just having the time every week with this podcast where I sit down and spend a significant amount of time listening to you talk about things, that makes me a better listener in life, and it's a good life skill. If you're not I can tell there's a lot of people who aren't good listeners. That's what Twitter's all about, basically.
Yes, that is definitely what it is. Being able to formulate the opinion and articulate it is a good skill for the podcast. Yes, it is also, you have to be able to listen to what the other person is saying and respond and build on it. And that's really hard to do. And that's more the part that, when I say this is useful for teaching, that's really what it is. Yeah. Is being able to, not just assume that you're right about something because you maybe have more experience or know more about it, and actually listen to what this like 14-year-old is saying about this poem. And they might be like talking out their ass, but you still have to listen and like respond reasonably to what they're actually talking about, and not just sort of like skip past it. That is a podcast skill, 100%.
And sometimes they'll say something like extraordinarily profound, and you'll kind of be caught off guard, you know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I totally get that sometimes too. And it's absolutely a podcast skill. All right. Speaking of good listening, let's go to our listener questions. That was a bad.
No, I thought if you had committed to it, I thought that was one of the best segues you had. I thought that was actually pretty clever, but then you just jettisoned it halfway through. If you had just fully committed, I thought that was really smooth.
Yeah, it was better in my... Yeah, I don't know. How do you think I've gotten it?
That's the only time I've ever complimented one of your fucking segues, and you just didn't even do it.
I mean, that is a question, Sean. How have my segues been over the years? Have I gotten better?
I mean, you mostly abandoned them at some point because I kept on making fun of them, probably.
Yeah.
But I mean, again, that one was really good. I don't know why you pulled out of it.
All right, confidence then. That's the next thing I'll work on. All right, so listener mail. Let's do some of these. Barry on Twitter writes, "Congrats on the milestone. I have wondered for a while about how the relationship with We Got This Covered, the website, started and how it ended. You also seem to have a quick editing turnaround. What's your approach to editing the podcast? Do you ever wish you could go back and clean anything up?" All right. So first question first. So let's just tell the story of this podcast.
Yeah.
This has to start a long time ago. So I have been writing movie reviews and TV stuff and publishing online for a long time. I started writing film reviews when I was 10, and I got a quote-unquote job with a kids section of the Denver Post, which is the big... Well, actually, at that time, it was published in the Post and the Rocky Mountain News. And I actually wanted... Rocky Mountain News doesn't exist anymore. They were the better paper. And then they went belly up. But the Rocky Mountain News published, and the Post published this section called The Colorado Kids. And when I was in 3rd grade, so this way predates Sean... well, I mean, you were alive. I just didn't know you yet. So I was writing for this little kids section of the newspaper called the Colorado Kids. I started doing sort of general reporting. I had an interest in movies at the time. They started to see that, my editor there, and started sending me to the press screenings as a kid. And when I was 12, with the release of Spider-Man 2, I became the official movie kid, is what they called it, which was the film critic for that section, and I started doing reviews. Eventually, I became too old to write for the Colorado Kids, so I wrote for a long time. I was asked to write for the community journalism initiative at the Denver Post called Your Hub, which is where community members submitted stuff. And I started a blog there that became pretty popular, and I did a lot of movie reviews, TV blogging, kind of cut my teeth on all of that. And by the time 2010, 2011 rolled around, podcasting had sort of... It's funny because podcasting, I feel like, did not get into the zeitgeist until a couple of years ago with stuff like Serial. But I always think of podcasting as starting in the late 2000s, because that's when you and I were like listening to stuff like the Rooster Teeth podcast and the Bungie podcast.
Yeah, I was listening to the Bungie podcast in 2007 and the Rooster Teeth podcast around then, which were the first ones that I ever listened to.
Yeah, and so, this is before I didn't have an iPhone until I graduated high school, so this was on actual iPods.
Yes.
And, I really wanted to do a podcast, so I started something. I had a monthly print column called The Monthly 10, where I did top 10 lists. And I decided to adapt that into audio form, did The Monthly 10. And the first episode I ever did of that, I don't think you were on that one, Sean. But you and I obviously had been friends for a while at this point. We did a lot of creative projects together in high school. And so at some point I invited you to start doing those with me. Quickly realized, right, Sean is like my best friend. We do all these kind of projects together. I have the best rapport with him. Why am I doing a podcast with... I was about to say something really mean. I was about to say, why am I doing a podcast with my brother?
Thomas has come a long way. That's very rude. He's not actually worthless. Come on.
I don't think that. Let me be clear. At the time, he would have been like 12 or something.
Yes.
So that's my point. Is all that? It's just that I was like, I have a co-host right here. Why? So we started doing it. It basically became our thing. We transitioned to the monthly stuff because we didn't like having to do a top 10 list. That was a horrible idea for a podcast. Just a bad.
Yeah. We especially when you don't know anything because you're like 17, and so we very quickly, I feel like, ran out of ideas of like, Top 10 superhero movies. Okay. Top 10 video game controllers is what I remember was like an early monthly 10. That's just like man, if we're already doing top 10 video game controllers, we're really fucked.
We were fucked. So
that's such a bad one.
But we got into a pretty good swing of things, I feel like, with the monthly stuff. We had started doing the Doctor Who reviews and stuff because that was when you had caught up to Modern Who and season 6 started with Matt Smith. And we started doing that. Out of the blue one day, so this would have been 2011, and we got this coverage started in 2012. So yeah, we were doing the monthly stuff for a while. In, I want to say, May of 2012, so this would have been our first year in college, I got an email out of the blue from the editor of We Got This Covered, who had been reading some of my stuff on my blog and was looking for new writers. We Got This Covered has become a pretty big site out there. I see it, thrown around a lot. At the time, it was kind of an up-and-comer. They asked me to join as a staff writer. I did that. I reviewed movies for them, and I also had this podcast, and I was not planning on bringing it over, but they asked because they wanted to have a podcast, and I said, I was actually very prescient. I said, I'll do it. I maintain full editorial control, and I can take it with me when I'm done. And that was basically like where we started with it. And so you and I relaunched the show as WGTC Radio. And the decision to move the podcast from monthly to weekly was such a weird one because it was the first day we did it, Sean. We did our top 10 movies was how we started. Then we did a Spider-Man podcast. And then quickly out of the blue, we did that Prometheus podcast because you had seen Prometheus and we were joking about it. And suddenly we had 3 episodes and we're like, well, we're not going to wait 3 months to put this all out. And I just kind of turned to you and I'm like, Sean, you want to do this weekly? And you're like, sure. And that was the most momentous decision that we spent no time thinking about because we're still doing it weekly. And I was with We Got This Covered for about 2 years. And ultimate, I don't know how much I want to talk about it. I find the grind of writing for film publications on the internet, and I'm not talking necessarily specifically about We Got This Covered, that's where I worked, but this is true about a lot of places. I find it a little soul-crushing. I find the search for SEO, search engine optimization clicks, to be absolutely soul-crushing. I think the amount of stuff you're expected to put out to keep up with the grind of the internet is dumb and counterproductive. I think audiences on big sites like that are there basically drawn in by a lot of clickbait, and they're not interested in substantive writing, and so you would get a lot of, I just didn't get good comments on things, it was a lot of, and obviously, look, I'm a straight white guy, I'm not getting the worst of this or anything, it was not substantive discussion with the audience. I've read one on here, there was the great comment from a couple years ago of the guy who told me to go burn in hell and die because we didn't like Prometheus. So, there's stuff like that. I did a lot of writing with We Got This Covered. I'm very proud of, and I'm glad I got to do. And that was a lot of fun. But honestly, the straw that kind of broke the camel's back was, one, like I said, there were just some things with the audience and the grind that I wasn't totally into. I was also, I will say, getting more into my own studies at the University of Colorado because for my whole life, when I did movie reviews and stuff, that was kind of an escape for me. That's where I went to do work that was interesting to me because school bored me. And then suddenly I was in this film department at CU where I wasn't bored by school and I was actually really engaged and I just didn't want to do it as much. And that was good. That was healthy. That was a very healthy thing for me. But then you and I really loved doing that podcast. But it was our weird podcast where we were doing a lot of stuff about weird Japanese role-playing games and Doctor Who and things that were not clickbaity. And there were a lot of internal discussions. I can just say the editorial staff, I was an editor, but the other people on the editorial staff did not like our podcast. Not necessarily because they didn't like us. They just were like, this is not the kind of stuff we like. It's not clickbaity enough. It's too about you guys. And so my final decision was basically like, well, I want to keep doing this podcast. If I'm doing it on my own, I'm going to leave anyway. So I left. Again, I had that agreement early on, took it with me. And we just, Sean, you and I talked for about 5 minutes, like, what do we call it now? And we said, is it going to be weekly stuff? And we were both like, no, it's not going to be fucking weekly stuff. Let's think. And then we thought, and we're like, we'll find a better title later. And we never did. And that was episode 76, was the first episode of Weekly Stuff. And then we've been going ever since. So I think that covers all the bases, right, Sean? You can fill in any of your experiences with it.
Yeah, because obviously my side of it is very funny just because I was always so disconnected from the We Got This Covered part of it, which is why, like, it would 100% make sense that website would not want this podcast, because I literally had no affiliation with We Got This Covered other than that I'm your friend. So I was never under their employ. I never was in a contract. I never, like, received money. Like, I was not in any kind of relationship with the website We Got This Covered at all, at any point. Which, like, I didn't care. I didn't really want to be. I only was because you were. Because from my perspective, like, all of this, from my involvement with it, has always felt like it grew out of us doing those projects in high school together. Of, like, we did some machinima videos for different schools. Like, we did school projects. Like, we did a machinima video of Grapes of Wrath. And then we did, because we were on the debate team together, we did videos that's kind of like weird, funny live action videos about forensics debate stuff. And especially we did audio commentaries for those things, because why not? You know, like, we put all the effort into making them. We would print off, like, little DVDs and give them to people we knew. Might as well record, like, a dumb audio commentary. And that, from my perspective, is, like, the first podcast stuff we did. Yeah. And realizing that, like, this is something we could do, is just, like, riff with each other on stuff. Like the kinds of podcasts that we listened to, like the Rooster Teeth podcast or the Bungie podcast. And so then when you started doing the monthly 10 stuff, because we would also talk sometimes about the stuff you were writing for your hub in, like, whatever monthly 10 list you were doing and stuff like that would come up sometimes. And so, yes, then you asked me to be on one of the podcasts. And I was like, sure, yeah, I'll be on one of it, with the original plan very clearly being like, oh, and then I'll ask other people to be on other episodes. And it very quickly became like, you just kept on asking me every time. I'm like, yeah, fuck it, sure, let's go. I'll talk about Spider-Man. I'll talk about video game controllers. Like, I will spend 10 minutes of my life talking about how I really like the Genesis controller, because I'm the only person here who's played the Sega Genesis. So let's do it. Yes, and then once we went to college, that's when the monthly stuff version was basically entirely recorded in your dorm room. Yep. So I completely associate that period of the podcast with being in your dorm room and podcasting about, like, the Star Wars Blu-rays that had come out, because that's how long ago this was, as the original Blu-ray releases of those movies in 2011. Yes, and then we got our condo together. You got into that relationship with We Got This Covered. We decided to just, like, keep on doing the podcast. We turned it weekly. And the WGTC radio days were fun in some ways because like, we would have things happen, like, you would get sent the Terminator Blu-rays, which is a podcast I remember very fondly of. We got those Blu-rays. You were supposed to review them for the site. It was like, well, might as well do a podcast on them too. We watched the movies together. Or at least it was Terminator 1 and 2. I don't think we ever talked about Terminator 3. I don't know. I don't know if that was even in there or not.
It was, and I watched it, and I am one of the weird people who kind of likes Terminator 3. At least it's better than the other sequels, but yes.
Yeah, maybe I just made the executive decision that I didn't want to watch Terminator 3, so that was not on the podcast. We just talked about 1 and 2, the movies I liked. And so then we would do that podcast. And then, so from my perspective, I always did find it very funny that, for me, the podcast was always 100% kind of a hobby kind of thing, even in the WGTC radio days. And I just found it very, very amusing that I had this weird, like, parasitic I don't even know how to describe it. Like, I was this flea on the back of an elephant that nobody knew that I was there. I had no contact with other people from that website. And I want to make it very clear, I 100% wanted it that way. Like, I was not ever interested in that part of the relationship. And I think it is better that we ended up going independent, and I definitely prefer the podcast as us being totally unchained. Don't have to worry about it. I don't have to think about how, for some reason, there might end up being someone going to this We Got This Covered website, click on this podcast link for their podcast, and then hear me talk about Persona 4 for like 40 minutes. Which was a game that was like 4 years old at that point. Like, no connection, no relationship to anything. It was purely, I had just, like, decided to play that game and wanted to talk about it on the podcast.
Yeah, and that's what the podcast is, you know, and I think that was also for me just a time of learning, like, where are my passions at right now? Okay, it's with the podcast. That's what I want to be doing. I don't need We Got This Covered to do that. Because you also said, Sean, there first, you know, you were never paid by them. I really wasn't either. I probably made less than $100 total working for them. Never made any money for the podcast. I think I got some for reviews and features and stuff like that. Not a whole lot. It was never an income, I would say. But, because I had a separate outside job where I actually made money. But yeah, so that's pretty much the story of the podcast. That's a very long answer to that question, but we've never really told the story here, like all put together. Yeah. So, yeah. Let's see. So Barry also asked, you seem to have a quick editing turnaround. What's your approach to editing? We do have a quick editing turnaround because essentially I don't edit it. I would love to live in a world where I had where I could like enter a little time vault where time stopped going, and I could listen to all 3 hours every week and cut out any audio abnormalities every time you or I say anything like that, and like completely polish it. We don't have time for that. Sadly, there's not enough time in the week. It would never come out. It would not be timely if it did. We don't have the money to like hire an editor or something to do that. That would all be great. It just doesn't exist. So I think it's the best way to do it is I do some nips and tucks, and I do usually have a notebook open or a piece of paper where I am writing down moments that I know I will need to go in and cut, and I do get those. And you never hear those because they're cut, so you wouldn't even know I've edited it. Some projects get more than others. The one I have done by far the most work on was our video game soundtracks episode. I spent many, many hours editing that one, and that's really the reason why that came out as a two-parter, is I edited what I had done and then put that out, and then like next week there was part 2 because I needed another week to work on it. Weekly Suit Gundam gets quite a bit more editing than the other ones because it is not a weekly thing that we do regularly every single time, and those are also sort of aimed at I don't want to say a different audience, but they go out to some different platforms and stuff, and I just, we do fun things with them, so those are edited a little differently. But yeah, since I moved to Iowa and we started doing these remotely, there is more editing involved in that I have to sync up our different audio tracks, and I check all of that. It is a somewhat significant amount of work. I mean, when we're done recording, there's probably at least half an hour to an hour of stuff for me to do in terms of getting all the audio files, putting them together, editing it. I make multiple versions. I have a lossless version for archives. I have an MP3 version that goes out to all the different sites. I put it all... Now we have a really good podcast app called Simplecast that basically does all the work that I used to have to do, putting it on all the different platforms. But then I have to write up the show notes and things like that. So there's work involved, but editing is not a huge part of it.
Yeah, like the only way realistically that you would be able to do like significant editing work is if these podcasts were not 3 to realistically speaking, we've somehow ballooned out to 4 hours being a not uncommon length for some of these podcasts at this point. It's just starting to work out that way. Because if they were like 40 minutes to an hour long podcast, then that would be something you could kind of do more editing on. But yes, 3 hour podcasts every week is... that's manpower you need to nip and tuck everything that would need to be nipped and tucked at like a very professional level.
Yeah, and Barry asks also, do you ever wish you could go back and clean anything up? Yes, obviously. They're like, sometimes I hear myself say or there's a cough or something, and it's like, I wish I had caught that. But it's, we're only human, and so I don't regret it that much. If there's ever anything you or I say that like we really are like, I shouldn't have said that, I do cut it and you never hear it. So all the times we've made various slurs, those don't get on. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, we're just screaming horrible racial epithets all the time. You just are very good about cutting those out.
Yeah. Other than that, that's the only editing. No. I have cut the occasional stray comment. Usually obviously not in that zone. But I just mean, like if I felt like we said something like, oh, that was poorly worded, or that came across as insensitive or something, I will keep a note of that. But that's very rare, honestly. You're mostly hearing the uncut conversations.
Yeah, which there is something that I do find charming about that kind of podcast, where it's just like, nah, man, like warts and all, like this is all the all the weird pauses. Just sometimes it's nice to leave all that stuff in there and just let it be what it is.
Absolutely. All right, Jamie on Twitter asks, I'm curious as to whether there are any topics that have been vetoed by either you or Sean. Likewise, are there any topics that you almost didn't discuss that ended up being great content? Thanks for the years of work on the podcast. Looking forward to many more. Also, you both need to re-listen to every podcast and do a top 10 weekly stuff podcast list. I'm sure that's feasible.
some of after listening to the Top 10 TV Show podcast, there's a certain point at which it is too hard for me to go back and listen to my 20-year-old self talk about stuff I didn't understand.
Nope.
I can't do it.
No.
For podcast topics vetoed, this didn't end up vetoed. But I remember me being very resistant to the idea for a long time of doing the Persona soundtrack top 10 songs list because I thought it was so ridiculously niche, even for us. And I still believe that. I still believe that was one of the most ridiculous topic ideas you have ever had. And you were always so, you talked about it for, I feel like, a year and a half or something before I was like, fuck it. Let's just do, because I would have been able to do that podcast at any point. It's not as if I don't also obsessively listen to that music. I just is I don't know if we could really spend the time putting that whole thing together, even for the scope of our podcast. It was a little bit too much. Obviously, I eventually relented because that's what this podcast is. But that's one that immediately came to mind that I was resistant to and pushed off for a while.
I honestly cannot remember an instance where either of us have just said no to an idea the other had to talk about. I don't think that's happened.
Yeah. I think the only time something like that happens is if we're in very broad discussions that we will have about what we're going to do on next week's podcast, and you or I will say something that we immediately realize that's not something we can do.
Yeah.
And I can't think of any specific examples, but I'm sure that happens a lot when we are coming up with oh, could we talk about that? And it's no, we don't have the time to watch all that thing, or I don't know enough about that. And it'll be the kind of thing where it's oh, I don't have time to play that game, or I'm not going to end up being able to see that movie, and so we're not going to talk about it. And so it's less of a veto and more of a us hashing out what are realistically what is the thing we could talk about on next week's podcast. And obviously some ideas get sort of culled from that and some ideas don't.
Yeah, we brainstorm, obviously, but no, I don't think there's ever, I say to Sean, Sean, I really want to do a top 10 movies about sharks, or something. And you're like, Jonathan, you bastard. Those movies are bad for the environment. They promote a negative view of sharks, and sharks die because of those movies. We will not. That is morally wrong. That has never happened.
Yeah. Yeah, again, I think the closest we ever got was the top 10 Persona soundtrack thing. And obviously we made that podcast.
Which I think is hilarious that you're the one who had the objection to the hilariously niche topic when a lot of our hilariously niche topics come from your specific interests that rub off on me.
But I feel there's a big difference between let's do a podcast about Mobile Suit Gundam and let's do a podcast that's about our top 10 favorite songs on the Mobile Suit Gundam soundtrack, right? Those are two different, in my mind, those are two very, very different things.
I mean, I do have that penciled in for a future Weekly Suit Gundam of we're going to count down the theme songs, but
I mean, my number one Gundam song is always going to be the sad song that plays at the end of Mobile Suit Gundam episodes because that's the best Gundam song.
Yes.
But that's a discussion for a future day.
All right. So thank you, Jamie. That was a very nice comment. Let's see. Levi asked, have you guys played Undertale? If so, is it as good as everyone says? I feel like I need to play it. I'm sorry, Levi. I haven't played it. I've also heard it's good.
Yeah, I played the first hour of it forever ago, in 2015, whenever that game came out. And it didn't grab me, and I know that the game has a slow opening, and I'm sure I would probably like it, and I probably should also play it, but I have not actually played Undertale. It's on the Switch, though, so Jonathan, you should play it, because it's the Switch thing. You can just switch it up. Get that Switch.
Yes. No, I want to play it, too. I actually do think I got it in a Steam sale at some point, and I think I did the same thing as you, Sean, so I should probably make myself play it, because I'm sure it's good, just haven't played it. All right.
Yeah, part of my problem with it is that I already know basically everything that happens in that game. I got it completely 100% spoiled for me.
Oh, really?
So,
I have not. I don't know what it's about even, really. So
okay, then definitely you should play it then.
Yeah.
Because it sounds cool.
It does sound very cool. All right. Let's see. Next we have some person named Thomas in Japan. So one of our Japanese fans named Thomas wrote...
Oh, Thomas.
Thomas, yeah. Thomas.
Yeah. Yes, Thomas.
This is mean. This is where I would normally make an edit and edit it out, but I'm leaving it in as an example.
I mean, you're the one who can accuse your own brother of being valueless on your
I
podcast,
didn't mean to. All right. Thomas actually had a very good question. He said, It seems like you guys mostly talk about things you like instead of complaining about things you don't like. It's one of my favorite things about your podcast. You tend to be positive most of the time. Is this an intentional philosophy for your podcast, or is it just because you don't spend a lot of time watching or playing things you don't like? Thank you, Thomas. That is a good question. And I will say, I don't think Sean and I have ever sat down and had the make our manifesto for the podcast. But I think if we did, this is true.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. It is fun sometimes to do a Batman v Superman or Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man 2 episode where we are just angry. But life is short. We podcast a lot, but we only podcast a certain number of hours a week. And I would always prefer to spend that time on things I find at the very least interesting. I don't have to love it, but I have to find it interesting and worthwhile. And that is just, there's too much shit on the internet that is here are 50 things wrong with, X-Men 4 or whatever. And I don't think we need to contribute more to that. So yes, this is absolutely an intentional philosophy.
Yeah, same with me, that it is something that, because I think both of them are true, that since we're not being paid to review every movie or game or whatever, so we are never forced to play or engage with something that we don't explicitly want to. Sometimes we will kind of be you need to check this movie out kind of thing. Although even usually then it'll be no, not really. I think maybe that was something we more used to do. At some point, I think we arrived at the point where we realized, no, actually we don't. You saw Suicide Squad and hated it. I don't have to see Suicide Squad and have us do an entire podcast on it. You can just talk about your experience with that movie. And if I play something or I see something that I don't like, I don't have to force you to watch it. Also, I can just talk about my experience with it on the podcast and save the main topic for something that we both want to talk about, which is one thing I think is good about where we are at with the podcast, and that we can kind of do that. But all that being said, I do prefer the positive topics and the positive things. Obviously when we talked about our favorite memories of the podcast, other than the Game of Thrones one, which that's more of just how weird that whole circumstance was, and how funny I found it that we did the Game of Thrones podcast 4 months after it was relevant, because that's very much what we do on this podcast. Other than those select ones, the positive stuff is the stuff that stands out for me, and I'm sure for you as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I prefer that stuff. And every once in a while, I do enjoy the indulgement of cynicism and snark. We need it occasionally. We need our Batman v Superman episode. Every once in a while, you need to, just talk about something that, or even something that's, less, utterly horrible, a Metal Gear Solid 5 or something is one I think about sometimes on the podcast. It's, a big podcast in my memory that, I feel like we both worked through stuff by talking about that game on the podcast. Those can be really instructive, but I think the balance should be talk about way, way, way more positive stuff, and then every once in a while we'll have something more critically to say about something we really dislike, but that provides really important context for the things that we like a lot. So Metal Gear Solid 5 is a really good reference point that we use on the podcast for a game that does a lot of things very successfully, but for very specific reasons both of us really didn't like it overall. That then provides good context, critical context for listeners and for us in assessing other games we really like in relationship to something like that.
Absolutely. I think the cynical let's dunk on something thing, it's like Cookie Monster. It's a sometimes food, right?
Yes.
And I don't want to be Cookie Monster just eating the cookies all day long. I want to learn that it's a sometimes food. And if it's a sometimes food, it can be great. And I think those episodes are better when they're a sometimes food, right? I learned this about myself reviewing movies. When I was sent to review everything and I had no choice of what I'm watching, you get miserable really fast. Because I am a weird critic. I don't like writing negative reviews. I have written some really good ones in my life. I think there are some negative reviews out there of mine that I think are very funny and fun to read. And some of them were fun to write, but mostly they were coping mechanisms for what did I just waste 3 hours of my life on? And there are a lot of movies that exist that absolutely no one needs to watch, and that's okay. They can just fade into obscurity. They don't fucking matter. And so that, honestly, I think for the podcast, it just came from, part of it was just, it evolved from me learning that about myself there, It's just, I don't need that. So yeah, I think it's an intentional philosophy. I think it's more fun when we make it a sometimes food, and talking about things you like is fun. I'll say, I know, Sean, last year this did become an off the podcast discussion for us. Were we still talking about Doctor Who? Because Doctor Who Series 11 was so bad, and we had so many bad things to say about it. We love Doctor Who, but at a certain point, it felt almost masochistic for us and our audience of like, I don't know, there came a point where we wondered if we had anything more to really contribute, and I think that's going to be a real question when Doctor Who comes back, if we keep doing weekly, if this is the level of quality it exists at, because I don't think there's any reason to force yourself to do it. And if there are people out there who love the current Doctor Who, that's fine, more power to them, that's great. I just don't know if we need to be part of that discussion. If we're not there, that's okay, right?
Yeah, that is maybe it'd be a thing that we do a series overview or something, but absolutely it was it got to a point with that season of Doctor Who where it's we saw it through, but at a certain point, you're kind of beating the dead horse. It's clear what our feelings were, and that they were not going to change about the direct. That season was not changing, and our opinions were not going to change about it.
Because, on one hand, Sean, I am so fucking glad the episode exists where you go off on Kerblam, because it needed to be there. But then all the post-Kerblam episodes, I don't know if we said anything new. Do you know what I mean?
Because the show didn't add anything new, so it was...
Once you've learned the Doctor is a pro-corporate fascist, I don't know what you can do with that, right?
Yep.
All right, one last piece of listener mail, and I saved the best for last because Jay Mitchell wrote us a really big note that was very, very nice, and is going to make us blush. First off, congratulations on 300 episodes. I've been listening since I discovered the 10-hour Persona 5 discussion 2 years ago. High five over the internet on that one, Sean.
Yep, our magnum opus. It draws another unwitting suspect and victim into our trap.
He says, I legitimately admire the dedication you two have to getting together and recording 1.5 to 3 hours of podcasts a week, and that you've consistent...
1.5? 1.5.
And
it happens. I guess it does happen.
And
not often.
And that you've consistently done so for over 7 years now. What I love most about the podcast is how genuine it is. It's two friends having a chat about their favorite games, movies, and shows. No corporate sponsorships, no 2 to 3 minutes of ad reads, none of the nonsense that other podcasts have resorted to in their chance to earn a buck. The format you present makes the podcast very personal, which is one of the many reasons I look forward to listening every week. While I don't always agree with your points of view, Whispers, I liked Batman v Superman a lot. I always appreciate the level of thought and explanation you put into your discussions. Even when I do disagree, I can always find validity in your arguments. In 2019, the age of clickbait and controversy for the sake of attention, that means a great deal. Congrats again on 300 episodes, and here's to as many more as you care to make. Thank you, Jay Mitchell. That is one of the nicest notes we've ever gotten.
Yeah, thank you. Because it is... I feel like that, how he describes the podcast is how I always hope it kind of comes across.
Yeah.
Is that it's us chatting very honestly about whatever it is we're doing, and that it's never, it is a hobby, and so it that has a lot of its drawbacks in that we are not getting paid for it, but it has its advantages in that we are not tethered to something else and have other responsibilities associated with it. So yeah, thank you very much. That's a lovely comment.
Absolutely, and it shows a lot of maturity on your part to keep listening to us even after all the things we've said about that movie you really like, because we were really mean.
Yep, it's just one of those things that, again, like with Metal Gear Solid 5, there are people who love that game, and I get why. It is our critical taste. It is Batman v Superman is definitely one of those reference points for us about things we like in modern movies and things we do not like in modern movies. Batman v Superman is a useful example for our critical tastes.
Yes. And I just want to be clear, though. If anyone wanted to sponsor us and make us do 2 to 3 minutes of ad reads and I could make a lot of money off that, I would sell out in a hot fucking minute.
Oh, sure. Yes. No, I'm not above it.
No,
I'm getting paid a teacher's salary.
Yeah.
I'm not getting paid enough.
I'm getting paid even less than you, and I pay to host this fucking podcast, and I'm fucking cheap. So there you go.
Yeah,
I'm half kidding. But yes, I mean, I get annoyed with ad reads on podcasts too. But yeah, I'm not going to pretend I'm holy. I'm not going to say, I want to make clear, I have not been turning down, we are not ideologically turning down MeUndies and Casper. If they were coming to us with a bunch of money, We are not that good of people.
I'll chill out for Squarespace all day, every day. Audible. I'm an English teacher, man. I'll hack for Audible. Come on, let's go. I can recommend a bunch of shit on Audible.
All right.
Do it. Give me some money.
And Jay Mitchell had 2 questions. Do either of you have favorite YouTube channels or streamers you watch? Can be gaming, media related, or something like cooking, history, science, etc.
Yeah, so for me, obviously Giant Bomb is a big one for me for video games. I talk about it all the time on this podcast. Giant Bomb, the Giant Bombcast and the Beastcast, which are the 2 podcasts they do. Bombcast comes out on Tuesday, Beastcast is on Friday. Those are my favorite podcasts. I listen to them all the time. I watch a bunch of the Giant Bomb's content. It's where a lot of my video game knowledge and opinions kind of come from, some of that stuff. So I have them. Waypoint, I'm a huge fan of. That also comes from Giant Bomb because Patrick Klepek and Austin Walker from Waypoint are Giant Bomb alums. So they're great. Their Waypoint Radio podcast is awesome. That's not quite YouTube, and I don't really watch their streaming stuff, but that's another piece of media I go to. And then the other main one I do a lot of is I like to watch the Achievement Hunter Let's Play stuff, which that all came out of Rooster Teeth. I don't really engage with any Rooster Teeth content other than that at this point. It's been years since I listened to the Rooster Teeth podcast or any of that other side of it. But the stuff that the Let's Play team does, I do enjoy watching their Let's Plays a lot.
I'm weird. I do not listen to any video game podcasts. I do not really listen to any movie podcasts. I do not watch game streaming. I don't really watch gameplay videos. I'm weird that way, I guess. And part of it is that I host a podcast about it, so it is hard for me to listen to it. Not in the sense that
Sure.
I think there are a lot of really good ones that when I do hear one-off episodes, I'm very impressed. It's just sort of I'm in my headspace about it, and it's hard to bring in those other things. On my off podcast time, I listen to very different things. If I go through, I listen to a ton of podcasts every week. They're mostly politics and news. And then a couple of talk shows that I find interesting. I listen to Grace Helbig and Mamrie Hart's podcast, This Might Get Weird, that's very funny. Allison Raskin and Gabby Dunn's podcast, Just Between Us, which has been running about 20 weeks now, I think is the best podcast I listen to every week. It's hilarious and insightful. I listen to news. I listen to The Daily from the New York Times. I listen to Pod Save America. I listen to 538. Stuff like that. So that's kind of what I spend my time with. I listen to at least one British news podcast because Brexit is my favorite spectator sport. And then with movie stuff on YouTube, I tend to like some of the video essayists. Lindsay Ellis we mentioned a lot. Yeah. I love her stuff. I like ContraPoints for the cultural criticism sort of angle she has. Things like that. I subscribe on YouTube to Game Explain. I really like, they mostly cover Nintendo stuff, and I like their stuff a lot. And it's quick news hits on YouTube that help me keep up to date with some of that stuff that I'm interested in. But yeah, I do read a lot of gaming sites. I enjoy reading Kotaku. I enjoy reading Waypoint, and stuff like that. I just don't listen to it much, and I have never been into game streaming and things like that for whatever reason. So there you go.
It's interesting because I'm the opposite of that. I do a lot of reading for the news politics stuff, but I listen to basically no news or politics podcasts because when I do, I find myself getting very upset about it for some reason. It's just that's the kind of thing that I would rather read because then I can do it very much at my own pace. Whereas I almost never read game news articles or stuff like that. I get all that through podcast stuff.
Interesting.
So it's interesting that we're kind of the opposite. Really quick, just because I pulled up my YouTube subscription feed because I want to shout out a couple of other ones that I really like. One that if you're into Japanese language stuff and Japanese culture stuff, there's a relatively obscure Japanese channel that I just adore, particularly for he does these on-street interviews in Japan. Just sort of stopping random people and asking their opinions on culture stuff and sometimes legal stuff. He's got a good backlog of videos, and it's That Japanese Man Yuta, which is such a great channel name. And it's just this Japanese guy who is bilingual. He speaks Japanese and English. He has stuff where he teaches different Japanese concepts. He had a video recently where he talked about Japanese accent stuff and how can you pronounce words in Japanese well. And so his content I just find like very interesting because it's a good brief snapshot into like different kind of cultural opinions in Japan. And then just Yuta himself, that Japanese man Yuta, he's a very kind of funny, weird guy, and it's fun to watch his videos. So I will shout his out as well, because I know that we have, obviously on our podcast, people that are interested in the Japanese side of stuff, and that's where I go for some of that.
Yeah, I'm looking at my YouTubes. I follow a lot of like vloggers and lifestyle and comedy stuff, but sort of more in our wheelhouse. I also just have to give a shout out to the Girlfriend Reviews channel. That is a channel I am actively in envy of their production and comedy. I think they are very funny. I think it is a great point of view. It's a really well-produced show. If you don't watch it, the whole shtick is sort of, it's the girlfriend in the relationship talking about watching her boyfriend play games. And it sounds like it would be sort of like culturally reductive for 2019, but it's more than what you think it is from like the log line, and I very much enjoy that channel, so I thought I'd give them a shout out. Not that they're very popular. They don't need the shout out, but I'll give it to them. So yeah.
No, and then my last recommendation, I've talked about it before, and it might come up again later on this podcast. Who knows? The Japanese Nintendo YouTube channel. If you speak Japanese, you're missing out because there's some hot fucking shit that goes up on the Japanese Nintendo YouTube channel that's really fucking good. So people should check. None of it's in English, but it's fucking funny. It's good stuff.
Final listener question, also from Jay Mitchell. What are your plans for Persona 5 The Royal? Getting the Japanese release or waiting until spring 2020? I think we're waiting until spring 2020.
I haven't made a decision yet.
I'm waiting because I'm not going to play it in the Japanese language copy. Yeah. I am learning more Japanese every day, not enough to confidently read the game in Japanese. So I will be waiting for the international release. Sean, I don't know. It's a busy fall. Don't do it to yourself.
Yeah, I don't... we'll see if I can resist. I don't know. I watched a Japanese YouTube video of someone playing the Shido boss fight just because I wanted to get some of that Shido as Char back into my life, and it just happened to be a Japanese video, and it's like, in my heart of hearts, Persona 5 is just a Japanese game that has Japanese text, and so there's something that I kind of want to bottle that feeling up again. So who knows? Like, maybe I'll be an idiot and I'll wait till the English version comes out and get the fucking Japanese version anyways. Because I'm stupid. Maybe that's what I'll do.
I think you probably should just get the Japanese version if that's true to you. But maybe just get it and like sit on it until we do a podcast about it or something.
Yeah.
Or wait until it goes on sale or something. Although it's a Japanese game, that's not going to happen. So we'll see. But we will talk about it. And also my brother Thomas, I was talking to him last night. Apparently, for the release of Persona 5R, which is imminent in Japan, there are multiple cafes that are going to be hosting like LeBlanc cafe-themed things, and he has entered the lottery to get to go to one of those. And if he does, he will 100% be a guest on this show, because they are going to be serving like the LeBlanc pudding and stuff like that, and he's going to tell us all about it.
Awesome. Yeah. Yes. Like, let's just have him. He should fucking live stream it. Like, just to download some app on his phone, live stream the whole experience, and we'll put it in our podcast.
Yep. All right. So, Sean, do you want to move on to our main topic?
I think it's probably about time.
We are going to do today part 1, there will be a part 2, of our top 10 favorite TV shows, asterisk, not anime. So, let's reiterate, Sean. We talked about this a few weeks ago. You and I chose to do this asterisk not anime because we love a lot of anime. Anime might dominate. It might dominate my list. It would certainly dominate your list. And yes, it would be kind of counterproductive. So we love anime, and we will at a future junction do an anime top 10. And it'll be a blast. But for this one, we said not anime. And I think other than that, no restrictions. So like anything as long as it's not Japanese animation was fair game for this list. That's how I looked at it.
Yeah, for me personally, like I don't know if anything would have made it quite on my top 10 regardless. But just to make it easier for myself, I basically dismissed any animation.
Okay.
So there's no animated program whatsoever. I just kind of put that out of my mind. Again, I'm not sure if the list would even be different regardless. There's one that maybe would be, but that'll be something. If we do the anime episode, or when we do the anime episode, I'll probably do something related to that. Haven't thought about it too much. But yeah, like my main thing was, could this be justifiably called a live action TV show? Yes, then it is okay to be on my list. And there are some that are more unusual picks. That like it doesn't, like, specifically what I mean is, like, it doesn't have to be narrative, right? It doesn't have to be a narrative TV show. It can be other things as well.
Yeah. Mine all turned out to be narrative, but that, again, I did not have a specific restriction. I have one animated show, so, look forward to that.
I bet I know what it is.
Yeah, you can guess what it is. But yeah, then just from there, we have been talking about doing this for so long, Sean. The Word document I was making this list in, I think I made in like 2017 and started putting stuff on it. This one was hard. I have to say, my top 3 were immediate. I knew the 3. I knew the order. Those 3 were just boom, boom, boom. Easy. That was the easiest part of any top 10 list I have ever made. It was the most obviously top 3 of my life. The other 7 gave me fucking heat sweats. I was so nervous about figuring it out. And I think I came to a realization making this list, Sean, that these lists are and have to be a snapshot in time. I can't possibly capture my holistic all-time these define me shows because I change and we all change. So I really tried to lean into it. I do think those top 3 are as close to a definitive Jonathan Lack shows as you will find. But the other 7 was like, it was gut check. What shows mean the most to me in this moment? I really specifically tried not to get into my own head about like, oh, recency bias, but do I have enough balance of this and this? I was just like, gut check. What do I think about a lot? What means a lot to me? If you asked me a year earlier, if you asked me a year later, it would be different. But I'm about to turn 27. I think these capture where my head is at that age. And I really like the final look of my list. I think it's a really cool, it's going to surprise a lot of you. There's a lot of things on here there's a lot of things that are not on this list that I know a lot of you will think will be on here, and they're not. And I was very surprised and happy with the final 10.
Yeah, mine is pretty similar in that it's, for me, my top 4. I always knew were going to be my top 4. The ordering for a couple of them changed a little bit, but I knew what my top 4 were going to be for sure. And then for me, the other 6 evolved like a lot. And there were some on there that, like, I have a couple that were started out as like, this was a number 10 that moved up a lot. The one that was like something I had never even considered, that kind of at the last minute I realized, oh wait, no, this 100% is a TV show and it has to be on my list. There's stuff on here that I know I have never talked about on the podcast or ever intimated on the podcast or to you in any way, Jonathan, as things that I have ever seen.
I'm excited.
So I'm excited to get to those. And there's one show on here I know I have like briefly mentioned on the podcast, but is the show that I think probably maybe nobody listening to this has ever seen. So I've got some weird picks. I've got some picks that people do not know that I've seen. But I am also very happy with the state of the list as it has currently turned out.
Wonderful. Well, do you want to go ahead and jump into the countdown? In this episode, we're going to do number 10 through number 6. Next week, you'll hear 5 through 1. You want to go ahead and get started, Sean?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. My number 10 is the most recent show on my list. It ended this year, so it will be one of the most recent shows we talk about. It will have to have been. And it is Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, created by Rachel Bloom and Aline Brosh McKenna, that aired on the CW from 2015 to 2019.
I was working hard at a New York job making dough, but it made me blue. One day I was crying a lot, and so I decided to move to West Covina, California. Brand new pals and new career. It happens to be where Josh lives, but that's not why I'm here.
She's the crazy ex-girlfriend.
What? No, I'm not.
She's the crazy ex-girlfriend.
That's a sexist term.
I could try to give you the in-depth premise of this show, but I think I'm just going to try to recite from memory the first season theme song, because the first season theme song just tells you the story. It's about a girl named Rebecca. She was working hard at a New York job, making dough, but it made her blue. One day she was crying a lot, and so she decided to move to West Covina, California. Brand new pals, new career. It happened to be where Josh lives, but that's not why she's here, she says. And then there's a chorus. Anyway, it's a very catchy fucking theme song. Because Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is a musical comedy hour-long show on the CW that is, as I said, Rachel Bloom, who created and co-stars in it, stars in it, as Rebecca Bunch, who is a high-powered sort of New York attorney who's about to make partner, and she is depressed. She has mental health issues. She's in a bad place in her life. She does not like her career. and she has a run-in on the street in New York with her old crush from middle school, Josh Chan, who is moving to West Covina, California, which is a fictional town that is 4 hours from the beach. And she decides to follow Josh to California. She tells everybody she's not going there just for Josh, but she really is. And she makes some new friends. She starts working at a new shitty little law firm, and she starts learning things about herself. And there is a lot of musical numbers because every episode has at least 2 original songs, which means that at the end of this show, which was 4 full seasons, they wrote over like 200 songs for this fucking show, which is insane. And they're all pretty damn good, and it's pastiches of all different musical genres. And Rebecca learns a lot about herself. All of the other characters on the show learn a lot about themselves. It is a show that is kind of the anti-TV show in a lot of ways, at least the anti-network show, because a lot of network shows, and a lot of great network shows, including ones we'll both talk about later, are not about change. They're about stasis. They're about formula, and they're about giving you the same kind of hit every week. Crazy Ex-Girlfriend ran 4 seasons, and every season is a vastly different one than the one before because the characters are changing so much. Every season introduces a new theme song to kind of represent this. Rebecca's journey is pretty vast in terms of what she learns about her mental health, about what kind of person she is, about the other people in her life who go on big life journeys as well. No one is the same at the end as they were at the beginning. Literally, one person is recast, and it is actually one of the smartest things the show ever does is just letting this person be recast and leaning into it as a narrative trope. It's a phenomenal, phenomenal show. It's extremely funny. It's got a great point of view and sense of humor, and its characters are very funny and enjoyable to watch and have great chemistry. It is also extremely real and vivid in its depiction of everyday mental health issues, of depression and anxiety, and Rebecca is eventually diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and there's a lot in there. And it is the show that will be comfortable making, sort of scatological jokes in one moment and then talking very realistically about suicide and depression the next. And it is a cathartic show. It is a show that I think wants everybody who watches it to feel seen, to feel deeply, profoundly, meaningfully, lovingly seen. It's a show that is about reinvention, and it is a show that wants you to learn things about yourself, and I absolutely did watching this show. And then it's also a fucking great musical. And so one of the best things about it is you get the soundtracks after the show airs, and you have all these songs to carry around with you, and they're really funny, great songs. And those soundtracks are kind of a constant companion to me. I listen to them all the time. They're funny, but they're also just really good. And that's an awesome thing about it. And I'm not even a big musicals fan. We've talked about this before. Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is probably my favorite musical. I don't know if you can call it that because it aired over 4 seasons and like 70 episodes. But yeah, it's a great musical. It was a great sort of under the radar cult hit. And I love it to death. It ended earlier this year with season 4. And I will tell you, until the series finale of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, this was not in serious contention for this top 10. It's not necessarily that my feelings about it were radically different, but my favorite, because I have listed a favorite episode for every one of these shows we're going to talk about. And my favorite episode for Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is the final episode. It's called I'm in Love, Season 4, Episode 17, the last episode of the series. And that episode, it is the very rare show that I think the finale is the best episode because of how perfectly it contextualizes everything into an ongoing journey, hits the nail on the head, and has the absolute perfect cut to black moment. It nails the ending so hard that it makes everything that led up to it that much better. And I remember when that aired, Sean, I went to this Word document and I pin marked this and I said, this is on the list. I don't know where it is on the list. It has to be there for me because it had that much of an effect on me, and I didn't realize it until they tied it all together at the end. That is a really rare thing for a show to do, especially something sort of narrative serialized. Crazy Ex-Girlfriend basically is the exact qualitative inverse of Game of Thrones ending, where Game of Thrones ending makes you hate everything that came before. Crazy Ex-Girlfriend's ending makes you love everything that came before all that much more. and give it a try. I genuinely can't. It's hard for me to imagine the kind of person who would not be moved by this show. And it's all on Netflix, at least for a little while longer. I know the CW deal is going to be up soon when they move to HBO Max, but you can watch it on Netflix pretty quickly because it's not that long a show. And there you go. That is my number 10.
Awesome. Yeah, I have not seen Crazy Ex-Girlfriend because I don't watch a lot of more modern American television stuff, but it is a show I've definitely heard you talk about. I've heard people talk about that I should check out at some point because it does sound really, really good.
Quick test you can do for yourself. Go to Rachel. So Rachel Bloom started as kind of a YouTube, I don't know if star is the right word, but she did a lot of funny satirical music videos on YouTube, including Fuck Me, Ray Bradbury is her most famous one, which is great. My favorite of hers is I Steal Pets, which is from the auto-tune era, and it's all about how she's a sad teenage girl who steals pets from the popular kids. And I can't even talk about it without laughing. It's so funny. They're all great. Go watch some of her music videos. Fuck Me, Ray Bradbury, I Steal Pets, any of those. If you like those music videos, you will like Crazy Ex-Girlfriend because the music in Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is that kind of stuff, but now with a story around it, and about similarly sort of sad, weird characters who have interesting interior lives. So there's an easy way for you to test if you will like this show.
Well, I already know I like Fuck Me, Ray Bradbury because I've always really loved that music video.
Sean, you're a high school teacher. What would happen if you showed that to your students?
It depends on... it depends on the class. It depends on, the year of the student. I think I could get away with it if it's not with freshmen. I think I could get away with it. I'll have to think about it.
It's the great thing about being a college teacher, Sean. I can show whatever the fuck I want. And so,
based on the shit that got shown to you in college, that is definitely true.
Oh, yeah. I mean, sometimes I'll feel a little awkward about it afterwards, but, I can do it. Yes. Anyway, moving on. What is your number 10, Sean?
My number 10 is very different. This is the show that for a very long time was never even in contention because it had not occurred to me. And then it was just one night I had watched the show as I do with my parents basically every night that I have for 3 or 4 years. And I realized, what the fuck am I thinking about? Of course, this would be on the list. I'm an idiot. My number 10 is Jeopardy!
That's a great idea. I didn't even think about that, but that's fantastic.
Yeah, so Jeopardy is... everybody knows what Jeopardy is, the game show hosted by Alex Trebek. For me, Jeopardy is a thing that when I was much younger, I would watch a lot with my parents. And then once I moved back down from Boulder after graduating, we kind of started up a tradition of every night watching Jeopardy after dinner. And then also sometimes Netflix has done this great thing where Netflix puts up kind of on cycles old episodes of Jeopardy. So sometimes we'll do a couple of old episodes as well. And so it's a good Jeopardy for me serves the function that Jeopardy is supposed to function, which is this kind of family TV viewing experience. It's a very reliable show. There's not a lot of ups and downs, highs and lows on Jeopardy. It's just Jeopardy. It's just, 3 people answering questions about random trivia. And you sit there with, your friends and family and shout out the answers to the trivia, complain about the categories that you think are very dumb, complain about the just endless dearth of just meaningless, dull geography trivia, which serves about 60% of the trivia that's on Jeopardy. And then always you can tell who's going to win by the person who just immediately goes for all the geography stuff, because it's just a list of things that are very easy to memorize if you just have a fucking atlas at home and just memorize the names of all the rivers in fucking South America, and then you just pick that category. Nerds. But yeah, that's what Jeopardy is. It is 40% the TV show and it's 60% the TV viewing experience related around the show. And it is, the cultural tradition of Jeopardy is powerful. It's been going since 1984 in its current version with Alex Trebek hosting. I think still currently on Netflix, they have, I think the coolest one that they have done, which is a playlist of basically the season premiere of every year from 1984 up till I think it's like 2016. It's not quite the most recent one. And that is one of the things that's really fascinating, is seeing old episodes of Jeopardy, because one of my favorite things about Jeopardy is not just watching the show and having that viewing experience, but like viewing Jeopardy critically as this like middle class kind of like American cultural institution, like provides so much kind of insight, I feel, into what like the middle class American culture is and how it has changed over the years. And so watching old Jeopardy and seeing like the kinds of questions they would ask and like some of the kinds of questions that aren't asked as much anymore, the like slow gradual move away from the like standard Bible category, which we still have. There still are lots of Bible categories on Jeopardy, but it used to be like you could bet on every single game, either in the first round or the second round, there's going to be one category that is about something related to the Bible. And so one thing I do really enjoy and think is like, not maybe intentional feature of Jeopardy, but is something that I think is really valuable about it, is critically analyzing like what are the categories that come up on Jeopardy and why. Like, why on Jeopardy do you have a category that's just called mythology? And 9 times out of 10, any category just called mythology is going to be about Greco-Roman mythology. Occasionally, you'll maybe get some Norse stuff. Occasionally, maybe you'll get some Egyptian stuff. But it's so focused on what are the assumptions made by the people designing the questions about like what are common pieces of trivia that like people would know. And that's one of my favorite things about Jeopardy, is it's like just place in American culture, whether like in negative ways or positive ways. It is a like window into like, I think, a tremendous amount of insight that is always really fascinating. And so for me, every game of Jeopardy is about two things. It's about the game of Jeopardy, and it's about like, what does this game of Jeopardy say about like who we are as a culture? And again, I like a lot of that is not necessarily a designed feature of the show, but it is something that the show does exceptionally well. And all the while, Alex Trebek is like the perfect arbiter for all these things. He is like the ultimate game show host, if you want to call Jeopardy a game show. Like at some point, I feel like it's turned into its own category of show at some point. But he is always and always has been such a brilliant figure at the center of the show. For people who don't know, he was recently diagnosed with cancer, and he has decided to continue to host the show. So like, thoughts and prayers go to him and his family, and hopefully he can make it through this. Because when that announcement came out, that was something that like shook me so deeply in a way that I wouldn't have normally expected. But it is like, it's such a reliable part of the world that we live in. And he is this like constant positive figure for hope and sort of intellectualism in America. And I think Jeopardy is such a valuable cultural institution for all those reasons I talked about. And then it's also just fun. It's just fun to guess about trivia. It's fun to, get super excited every time a video game category comes up once in a blue moon, and I can just immediately run the category without even having to think about the questions, because American culture still assumes that video games have no real cultural weight or importance. So all the questions are the most elementary bullshit that anyone could answer. And so that kind of element of Jeopardy is just like so much fun. And it is one of my like happiest kind of TV viewing traditions in the past, like probably 5 years or so of my life, is having this kind of rock I can always come back to with my family after dinner. So yeah, so my number 10 is Jeopardy, which was something I had not thought about for a long time. And then as soon as I thought about it, I knew it had to be on my list.
And absolutely, that is a fantastic choice, Sean. I love it. I hadn't thought of it either, but it's a great choice. It is as simple as TV gets. That's got to be one of the cheapest shows to make, because it's basically the prize money and someone to clean the set, right? Mm-hmm. And that's it. And it's so effective every time. I don't think I watch it as much as you. It's actually the one thing I regret being a cord cutter about is that I don't have some kind of like access to just my local TV station to watch Jeopardy. I kind of just want to get an antenna for that, and I probably should, because it'd be worth it. But I love that it's on Netflix. Sometimes you can find it on YouTube. I got back into it earlier this year because it was the James Holzhauer thing, and then the Alex Trebek cancer diagnosis. So one very exciting, one very sad, but it got me watching and appreciating it again. And then I also have people in my office at school who they have a tradition of, if we're there late at night, two of my buddies come into our office and they just sit at the computer and watch Jeopardy and shout raucously at the screen. And it's like, what other show does that? You know, it's about sometimes inane, sometimes interesting trivia. And I don't know if I prefer the inane or the interesting, because they're both part of the magic of Jeopardy. If it was all interesting, it wouldn't work. And if it was all inane, it wouldn't work. But yeah, definitely everyone listening, let's all send some good vibes Alex Trebek's ways, because man, that dude, it's like he's like the rising of the sun every day, you know? What would the world look without him?
He's just a cultural touchstone, you know? It's like he's such a giant in that kind of area of our culture. And
it's a different role, but it's the closest thing we have to like a Walter Cronkite, you know?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely.
All right. Well, awesome choice, Sean. So it's my turn next. And my number 9 is my basic bitch choice for this list.
Okay.
Because it's The Office. The American Office from 2005 to 2013. And I know the internet is fed up of The Office at this point, or at least some segments of it, because this show was popular basically from when it started, and it has not waned in popularity for a goddamn day. Maybe in season 8 and 9, when it got really bad, we all wanted to not talk about it. But then the finale's really good, and then it went to Netflix, and now The Office is the show that every group of students I've had for 6-7 years, so, you know, increasingly younger people, still know every Office reference I make. It's the one show that is like that from our lifetimes, I feel like, Sean, that is that cross-generational. It's like, people talk about Friends. Friends doesn't have that impact to that degree anymore, I don't think. But The Office has it, and I keep coming back to The Office. And there was a time when Parks and Recreation, which is sort of a spiritual spin-off of The Office, would have been my pick on this list. Parks and Recreation is not on my list. That probably will surprise a lot of you. In many ways, Parks and Rec is the better show. It is certainly the more consistent show. The Office is a very inconsistent comedy, but that's part of its magic. The Office is the funnier show. The Office is the funniest American comedy to me. I have seen some of these episodes 10, 11, 12 times, and there are parts that still make me laugh like a maniac. It is just such a perfect stew of characters, of an absolutely universal situation. Everybody has worked for a jackass boss. Everybody has worked with weird coworkers. Like, there's nothing about The Office that I think you can't just get. And it opens up to so many silly and wonderful and sometimes very sweet and sometimes, I think, very insightful scenarios. And The Office is just, I have found over the years, it is kind of a warm, comforting blanket that I keep coming back to. It is what I will be drawn to on Netflix if I don't know what else to watch while I'm eating dinner or something. Because it is funny and it is fun and it is cool to be with those characters. And we all know it, but at a certain point, like, I can't be a hipster and be like, I can't like it because it's popular. I fucking love The Office. I'm one of those people who, that's probably why I have Netflix. Netflix is 100% losing my money when they lose The Office, or when I finally just buy the DVD set and then are like, yeah, I don't need you anymore, Netflix. It's just that good a show. And I could shout out all the characters, but I really do have to just give the shout out to Steve Carell, because Steve Carell, I think, is one of my favorite actors alive today, and he has done so much incredible work since leaving The Office. But I think his work as Michael Scott is next level, all-time TV Mount Rushmore performance, because Michael Scott is a character that should not work as an ongoing TV series, and we know that because the character he's based on, David Brent, was in 12 episodes of television, and that's all they could do. And Michael Scott is in like 200, and Michael Scott works, even though so much of what he does is objectively bad. We knew it at the time. Some of it looks even worse today. But Steve Carell is so innately likable, And he makes Michael Scott seem, no matter how ridiculous it gets, so fundamentally, absurdly, profoundly human that you laugh along with and at him consistently. They can do an episode as awkward and horrible a situation as Scott's Tots, which I love. That's the one where Michael promises a group of kids college tuition and then realizes he can't pay because it was a crazy thing. And that episode you have to basically watch through your hands because it's so awkward. Or something as sweet as his arc with Holly, either the first or second time. And it is all somehow in this performance Steve Carell gives a human being. And I think that is one of the most magical things I've seen in the history of TV. When I see that character on screen, I will laugh, I will have fun, I will feel weirdly comfortable because this is the show that's on. And then he left the show, and it got very bad for a while. Season 8 is not as bad as Season 9. Season 8 has some good stuff in it. Season 9 is almost unwatchably bad until the last couple episodes, and then the last two in particular. The penultimate one is very good, and the finale is one of the best episodes of The Office. It's one of the best comedy finales I've seen. But even then, like, part of The Office and part of it being a long-running American show, there are bad stretches, and that's kind of fun to just accept it and be like, okay, that was an off episode, let's see what they do next week. I think Season 6 has a back and forth that's like the Mafia episode, which is one of the worst episodes of TV, and then they do the one where you find out Michael Scott is sleeping with Pam's mom, and it's one of the funniest episodes of TV. And then I think the one after that is the Koi Pond episode, which is one of the more weirdly inert episodes of The Office. And they could just kind of pinball back and forth, and that's part of the experience. And especially when you're watching it on Netflix, fuck it. Watch what you want. There are episodes where I just skip through parts of it, get to the good parts. I watch clips of it on YouTube all the time. It's just a gift that, even having been dead for many years now, just keeps on giving. And to me, it's kind of, for my lifetime, I think it's kind of the platonic idea of a great American sitcom. I think it's my generation's Cheers, I think, if you were to compare it to another era. And I think there were points where I was making this list, Sean, where I wanted to be more high-minded and get in my own head. And it's like, no, The Office it has to be The Office. And I'll just say a quick note about Parks and Recreation, which is kind of the sister show. I love Parks and Rec. I hope there comes a day where I can watch Parks and Rec and it feels relevant again. Because the sad thing is, in the age of Trump, that show has been dated in a way that I don't think anyone expected it would be. But it is an Obama-era show about belief in the goodness of people to govern. And I want to be able to believe in that again. That is the one thing that makes Parks and Rec hard to watch right now. And it is not the show's fault, but it is really hard to watch a show about people just doing their best in government and being rewarded for it and being that fundamentally optimistic about politics in an era where, go look at the news. So The Office, luckily, does not have that problem. So there you go.
Very interesting. Yeah, like I watched most of The Office, and I've never had a huge attachment to it personally because I think it's not quite my style of humor. But my brother, I have no idea how many times he's watched The Office all the way through because he just loops it constantly. Yeah. Like he is one of the, like you said, he's one of those people that, like, yep, he has Netflix and it's just, The Office just goes and it doesn't, I feel like it's probably playing in his house even when he's not there. He just leaves it going. He just, like, he should just have a room that's dedicated to just streaming The Office from Netflix, and you can just walk into that room and there will be something playing and you'll just sit down and watch it. Because
I imagine, Sean, like, one day he'll have kids, and instead of getting a nanny, he just gets a room with The Office and leaves the kid in there.
Yes, yeah, so you will be raised by this classic American comedy TV show, and it will teach you all you need to know about how to make it in this world. Some way or somehow, there are enough episodes, it kind of hits every facet in some respect.
Yeah. All right. Anything else to say about that?
Office is a good show. I get what you mean by the, like, I want to be high-minded about it, but sometimes, you know, hey, The Office is The Office. It's beloved for a reason.
And, you know, nobody involved with The Office has become kind of a despicable human being the way, let's just say, a star of a different show called The Office has become, and we all feel kind of embarrassed for when we liked him and retweeted his stupid comments.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on. Your number 9.
My number 9, a show near and dear to my heart, is the Granada Television Sherlock Holmes adaptations, which ran from 1984 to 1994. This was on my old list as well, and it continues to be one of my favorite things. It is, for people who are not particularly familiar with these were adaptations made in the 80s and early 90s that basically the mission statement for this specific television series in Britain was to take the original Sir Arthur Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes short stories and to adapt them more or less as faithfully as possible into a televised medium. And that's what they are. So all the episodes are based on the existing short stories. There's no episode that has like kind of manufactured a Sherlock Holmes plot, which is more remarkable than I think people would probably expect, because like the far more typical thing to do with Sherlock Holmes is to take the character and take Watson, and like now we like to like transplant them to different settings and do like different twists on it. But even if you don't do that, to just take those characters and tell a completely different story with it and tell an original Sherlock Holmes story using those characters. And straight like faced adaptations of the original stories are surprisingly hard to come by. And so that mission statement was extremely valuable then, and it continues to be valuable because nobody else has ever tried to do it. Probably because there's no reason to do it, because they have been done basically as perfectly as they could be done. One of the major factors that makes this version of Sherlock Holmes as good as it is that they cast the best Sherlock Holmes and they cast the best John Watson. In fact, they cast basically the two best John Watsons. Maybe Martin Freeman can muscle into the number 2 spot, but he's the only one I've seen that can kind of get up there. The man who plays Sherlock Holmes is Jeremy Brett, who passed away shortly after the finishing of the stories that they got through. And Jeremy Brett was a just brilliant actor, and he's the kind of actor that, like, he basically was sort of born to play that role. Like, he became very famous off of playing this version of Sherlock Holmes. It was easily the most famous thing he had done. And he really sort of fully committed himself to the role. And since the project was to do faithful adaptations of the stories, the project was then also to try to do a very kind of story-accurate version of the character and not fall into the kind of trap that most Sherlock Holmes adaptations do, which is to adapt the character as he exists in the public consciousness and not the character as he actually existed in the stories, because those are two distinct things. And so Jeremy Brett captures something about the incredibly mercurial nature of Sherlock Holmes as a character, his ability to vacillate very extremely between different emotional states that I feel often are not featured in a lot of versions of the characters. I feel mostly we focus on this very like logical detective Sherlock Holmes, and that's all he is, and he's kind of like emotionless. And the Jeremy Brett Sherlock Holmes is far from emotionless. He will spasm out from like incredible depression and like deep kind of, introspective moods, and then jumping up on the table and shouting very dramatically because he's had some sort of like epiphany or incredible insight into the case. Like, he will just throw himself onto the ground to go find a clue because he's sort of snatched onto the next thing that he needs for his case work. And that ability to sort of portray someone who is a manic depressive, which is effectively how Sherlock Holmes is described in those stories, before that kind of terminology it really existed. That's the kind of character he is, and Jeremy Brett captures that so powerfully, and it's an incredibly magnetic, charismatic performance that ties everything together. And even when occasionally a script would be a little bit looser, or like the direction would not be good or as good on some of the episodes, Jeremy Brett would always bring everything together with like what is, I think, one of the all-time great TV performances of arguably maybe the best fictional character ever created in Sherlock Holmes. Like, it's certainly among the most rich literary figures we've ever made. And so that is obviously one of like the standout key elements of this whole series The other one is Dr. John Watson. So the way that these were produced is in separate series of kind of blocks of episodes that were usually actually separated by a few years. And the first one was The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, which encompassed 13 episodes in 1984 and 1985. And those featured a man named David Burke playing Dr. John Watson, and he was really good. Like, he's a solid Watson. Again, this is a Watson that is much more like the book, where he is much more steadfast, the kind of reliable, like, proper British Victorian gentleman who is going to stand by his best friend and work on these cases. He's like the, army veteran who can handle himself kind of character, not the bumbling buffoon that we so often get.
Yeah, and he's ejaculating all over the place.
Yes, and he's constantly ejaculating whenever Sherlock Holmes does something. He ejaculated over here, he ejaculated over there. For those who don't get that joke, read some of those stories and, think about the way that our vocabulary has evolved in the intervening century. So David Burke is a fantastic Watson in The Adventure of Sherlock Holmes. But then when they got greenlit to do another series, The Return of Sherlock Holmes, David Burke had another job, and so he had other responsibilities, so he had to stay on whatever that other gig was. And so they recast Watson with Edward Hardwicke, who is, for me, the best Watson. Like, he is perfect. He just absolutely has everything that character needs. He has, like, the hardness. He has that kind of Victorian steel to him, but then he also has that, like, deep abiding compassion for his friend Holmes that relationship needs, especially because where he comes into the story is after Holmes has faked his death and then comes back, and that's where the Return of Sherlock Holmes starts. Edward Hardwicke, fun fact, I just love this piece of trivia, so I always have to bring it up, is that he is the father of Catherine Hardwicke, the director of the first Twilight movie. So that's just fun, weird piece of trivia that I will always remember. This is the only reason I remember the name of the woman who directed the first Twilight movie.
She's done other things too, but yes.
Yes, but like that's like just, it's a weird piece of trivia that one day Jeopardy is going to ask about, and I've got it locked and fucking loaded. I'm ready.
Yes.
I'm at the ready with that one. It's going to come up one day, I swear.
One day, Sean, you will be on Jeopardy. It'll be Final Jeopardy. You're going to be like $1,000 behind, and the Final Jeopardy is going to be what British actor fathered the woman who directed the first Twilight, and you're like, I've been waiting. This is my moment.
This is my trivia. It's Edward fucking Hardwicke, the best Dr. John Watson ever. And that's what I write on the whole thing. And so yeah, so the actors playing the main characters are phenomenal. Generally speaking, like the work that they did on the show to adapt the stories is also so good. And so, like, if your project is like to list what are the best episodes of the Sherlock Holmes TV show, you just look at the list of what are the best Sherlock Holmes short stories, and those are the best episodes. So it's like the Speckled Band episode, all-time classic, because it's one of the all-time classic Sherlock Holmes stories. Red-Headed League, one of the great Sherlock Holmes stories, one of the great, like, incredibly funny episodes of the TV show, because that story is hilarious. The bigger specials they did for, like, Baskervilles and The Sign of Four, these kind of novellas that Doyle wrote, those are also great. So all of those are just absolutely phenomenal. And you know, one of the things that is interesting about the show, and is something that you kind of always have to contend with the show, is that Jeremy Brett became increasingly ill over the course of them filming these, and he had a lot of different health issues, some of them like mental, some of them physical. And so, you know, you can see his failing health in the last few episodes. Like, the reason why they didn't get through all the stories is because Jeremy Brett passed away. And, like, if he had been physically capable of doing it, I think they would have ended up going through and doing every single short story. And they got through probably about 80% of them. So they got the vast majority of the Doyle canon all adapted. And that is something that is, you know, sometimes, like, honestly, especially because I rewatched these a couple of years ago, it's something that's, like, kind of hard to watch the last few, because you can see, like, the incredible passion of everybody involved and the incredible love everybody had in making this TV show for those stories, which are stories that I adore, are there, but, like, the physical ability to actually see it all the way through is not, you know, did not last. And so it is, like, and which is something that is frustrating and sad about watching the show, but it is also in many ways something that is also incredibly powerful, because that is also they adapt many of the stories of the latter Holmes stories where Holmes is an older man and his health is failing, and, you know, like the story where he goes and becomes a beekeeper is one of the ones they adapted. And so that, like, it is a sad thing and sometimes a hard thing to watch, but there's something about it that is also incredibly powerful from a narrative and like kind of artistic perspective, and seeing like the energy and enthusiasm and dedication to see this all the way through. And it's just, if you like mystery stories, if you like Sherlock Holmes, you owe it to yourself to watch these. They are on Amazon Prime Video. That's how I rewatched them recently. They're all up there. So that is, if you want to watch them and you have Amazon Prime, like, you should just like just try them out, because they are so good. They have the perfect kind of older TV pacing that those kinds of stories need. They're not kind of like juiced up or punched up for television the way that I feel like they would be if you made that adaptation now. It is the right kind of staid, steady adaptation. Not a lot of like frills put on top of it. They just go for the story. And those stories are all-timers, and they stand up to the test of history so phenomenally well. And they are incredible sources for televisual adaptation, because they are very like powerful, I think, kind of visual stories that have a lot of like a good pace and a good drive to guide a single episode of a television show. So yeah, the Sherlock Holmes Granada television series has been with me forever. It's a show that I think on the original podcast we do, I described it this way, and it's so true, because this is how I discovered it. It is the kind of show you discover in like the back corner of the DVD section of your public library. That's what this show is, and it is the epitome of that kind of show. But now your public library is now Amazon Prime, so you can just watch it in the comfort of your home. I originally found it in the Jeffco Public Library, and like that's how I fell in love with it. But now you can just watch all of them streaming, and they are amazing.
Somehow, I have still never watched this show, and I feel bad, but I'm also excited that I get to see it someday, you know? 'Cause I love Sherlock Holmes too. One day, Sean, you and I should totally just do a podcast project where we rank our favorite Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm kind of amazed we've made it 300 episodes and not somehow done that. I mean, it would take a lot of work, but it would be fun work, so...
I think if Stephen Moffat's Sherlock had not gone to complete shit, we probably would have ended up there. If that show had ended like on like a big like upswing, we probably would have been like really high on Sherlock Holmes and done it.
Yeah.
As it turned out, that adaptation did not end up that way.
Yeah, I mean, I've got my Sherlock Holmes books just right here, like 5 inches away on my bookshelf right by my desk, and I would love an excuse to dive back into those, because they're so good. All right, so that was your number 9. Let's go to my number 8, Sean. I'm just going to straight up fucking cheat here. My number 8 is Vince Gilligan's Albuquerque televisual universe. AKA the Vagatu. Let's get this trending, guys. There's a new entry coming in El Camino. We got to get Vagatu trending. AKA, I am smushing together here Breaking Bad, which ran 2008 to 2013, and Better Call Saul, which started in 2015 and continues airing to this day. Both created by Vince Gilligan. In the case of Better Call Saul, created by Gilligan and Peter Gould. And yeah, this one I wrestled with a lot, because here's sort of the breakdown, Sean. Breaking Bad on its own, I think, is an amazing A+ show. I love it. It wouldn't be on my top 10. If I were picking a show from that era, it would be Mad Men, which I think is the better of the two AMC father shows, like the two shows that started AMC. I like Mad Men over Breaking Bad. Mad Men is not on this list, because then I had to ask myself, though, I like Better Call Saul more than either of those, significantly. But I can't put Better Call Saul on here on its own, because it's not done. And there are other shows on here that are not done, but they're sort of not done in the way Jeopardy's not done. Like you know what show I'm talking about, everyone? Sean has it on his list too. I just know it. We'll get there.
I don't know what you mean.
Yeah. But with Better Call Saul, obviously, it's heading towards a destination. I wouldn't feel comfortable putting it there on its own. But then I thought, but it's the Vagatu. It's the Vince Gilligan Albuquerque televisual universe, which is both of these things. And I think Better Call Saul is... Obviously, it only exists because of Breaking Bad. Nobody was going to go pitch the show, hey, we're going to pitch a show about a lawyer who's a good dude, and over the course of 6 seasons, he slowly, excruciatingly becomes an absolute monster. Do you guys want this? No? Okay, we'll leave. That would be what would happen with Better Call Saul, but because they made a hit show, they were able to make this. So Better Call Saul can't just stand on its own. And to me, Breaking Bad isn't as interesting if you don't have the extensions of the universe that have happened since, because I think what has turned out to be the case is that Gilligan and then all the writers and directors and actors who have come and editors and the cinematographers, because each show has had multiple cinematographers and editors, and like all the people who have come through this universe have increasingly gotten better at their jobs. They have made it richer. They've added new voices into the mix. And Vince Gilligan's Albuquerque is just one of the great television narrative sandboxes where they are able to do so many kinds of stories, roughly in the zone of they are crime stories, but I feel like it has become such a rich tapestry for exploration of human foibles and the notion of change over time and increasingly glacial change that feels very true to how people adapt and in many cases fall to their circumstances. And that is what makes these shows great. I think Better Call Saul, I think Breaking Bad in many ways just got better as it went along. I think Better Call Saul has gotten kind of picked up where Breaking Bad left off and then has gotten better as it goes along. These people are such phenomenal storytellers. They are such phenomenal storytellers at the level of writing, of just, I don't think anyone working in American TV today is better at breaking a story, putting it into episodic format, and following a set of characters as they move through changes in a way that feels very organic and real and oftentimes painfully relatable. They are, like, I listen to the Breaking Bad and then Better Call Saul podcast every week when they do it, where they basically have Gilligan, Gould, and that episode's editor, and often some of the stars and that episode's writer together to just talk about the process of making the show. I've learned so much about how TV and film are made from that, but you also realize just how thoughtful these people are about the art of storytelling. And I think you can learn so much about storytelling breaking down what they do. But they are also phenomenal visual storytellers. And I think the filmmaking on Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul is just out of this world good. And it's not just a case of as simple as it's got really nice cinematography. It does, but I think it's the level of how they put together just simple dialogue scenes, how they, create big mythological sweeping shots of the Albuquerque desert, but then also how they do things in more urban spaces on Better Call Saul. It is the quality of the editing on the show. It is where they put together these absolutely phenomenal audiovisual montages that just keep getting better and better as these shows keep going along. It is the daring nature of trusting visual storytelling to the degree where, like, the season 3 premiere of Better Call Saul, there is like a 10-minute sequence with no dialogue of just watching Mike, Jonathan Banks, tear apart his car because he's pretty sure Gus Fring got a bug in there, but he doesn't know where the bug is. And so we are just going to watch Mike work for 10 minutes, and there is an art in that no other TV show would have the buy-in from its audience and its network to just go to town, let's watch this dude do a very mundane task for 10 minutes with no dialogue. And that is ultimately, those are the things I love about these shows. And of course, there's also an incredible sense of showmanship. This is the series that took out its most famous antagonist in Breaking Bad, in Gus Fring, by blowing off half of his face, having him come out, straighten his tie, and then fall to the ground dead. And that is the most amazing exhale of tension in TV history. I fucking love it. But it is also a show that is just, both of these are so well attuned to, I think, the minute degrees of human behavior. And my favorite season of Breaking Bad, for that reason, is the third season, which is sort of a weird come-down season from the pyrotechnics of season 2, where it is just asking the question, does Walt want to keep doing this? Why is he drawn to it? Who is this guy actually under the surface? Who is, Jesse at a point where he has tried to get clean and is so broken inside? And season 3 is so much about the internal movements and mechanics of these characters, and leads to my favorite episode of Breaking Bad, which is Fly. It's season 3, episode 10. It is a bottle episode that Rian Johnson directed, where it's just Walt and Jesse stuck in the meth lab looking for a fly, and it is incredible and ends up in, I think, Bryan Cranston's finest moment on the series of his drug-induced speech where he almost tells Jesse what he did to his girlfriend and then backs off. But yeah, it's incredible. Season 4, the battle between Gus Fring and Walter White is so good that every time I watch the show, Gus Fring is such an amazing character that every time I wish more that Gus won and we just went on the alternate universe path where it's the Gus Fring show. Because God damn it, Gus Fring is evil, but he is good at his job. He's good to his employees when he's not cutting their throats. And, you know, if someone's got to deal meth, why not Gus Fring? I think he does a good job at it. And luckily, we've gotten way more Gus Fring because of Better Call Saul, and the most recent season had one of his best scenes ever. So, yeah. And then I think what Better Call Saul has done in taking this really pretty tertiary character from Breaking Bad, Bob Odenkirk's Saul, who was... Saul in Breaking Bad does not really have interiority. He does not have depth. Bob Odenkirk will tell you this. He's there kind of for laughs and for plot purposes. And then they made a show about him that is entirely about the death of a human soul. And I think it is one of the most audacious things TV has ever attempted, which is to take a character who was so one-dimensional and morally bankrupt, flashback to a point where he is a complicated human with a vibrant soul who I think has a lot of goodness underneath, and to tell the audience, we are going to spend 5 to 6 seasons watching this man excruciatingly lose every bit of goodness he ever had, and just self-flagellate until it's gone. And I tell people that's what Better Call Saul is about, and they're like, why the hell would you want to watch that? And I'm like, because it is one of the most brilliant, entertaining, introspective, weirdly life-affirming things you will ever see. But it is such a hard sell, and I love that it's only because Breaking Bad was the hit it was that they're able to do this fucking crazy thing they're doing on Better Call Saul. And yeah, seeing the trailers for El Camino, the movie that's about to come out, just really makes me... It's something I've said before, and I'll say it again. I hope the Vince Gilligan Albuquerque televisual universe keeps going, and I hope they keep branching it off. Gilligan doesn't even have to be involved. He wasn't on the last season of Better Call Saul. He directed, but he did not write for it because he's busy with this movie. And Peter Gould and company have built up plenty of a good enough team. You know, I think Vince Gilligan is the most humble auteur in the business. You just listen to him. He's a very down-to-earth guy. And what you learn from these shows is they really all are about collaboration. And I would love to see other people even play in this playground because it is such a rich world they have created and such a unique one. And I know this is a cheat, but just putting one of these on here would also be a lie for the purposes of my list and why I love them. So they have to go together.
Yeah, so I did not ever cheat on my list. My list is pure, untainted. But I think it's fair enough to pair Breaking Bad and Better Call, especially like as you say, since Better Call Saul is not technically done and they are so closely connected as TV shows. I think that's fair enough. Like as we talked about before on the podcast, I've not watched Better Call Saul. I'm waiting for it to be done. But Breaking Bad is it's a very good show. We don't need to extol the many virtues of Breaking Bad. People get it. Breaking Bad is great. Bryan Cranston is phenomenal, that show, but it is like you were saying about Gus Fring, like that is the main thing that I keep on like reminding myself that it's like sometimes hard to hold back from watching Better Call Saul, even though I know that with that kind of show I kind of want to wait for it to done for me to start working my way through it, but knowing that he's in the show is like, fuck, he's such a good character.
Yes,
I need more Gus in my life.
And Gus is not in Better Call Saul nearly as much as he was in Breaking Bad, but what that also means is that when they break the Gus Fring door and like bring him out, they will have just a phenomenal Gus Fring scene, and then they will put him back in the vault, and it's like, that's perfect. That's exactly what you want. He is such a great, but Breaking Bad and both of them are so full of great characters, because my favorite character in the whole franchise is Mike, played by Jonathan Banks, and he's not, it's always funny when I go back to Breaking Bad, he's not in it as much as I remember. He's in seasons 3, 4, 5, 5A, not even because he dies at the end of 5A, and that's it. And he's not even in much of 4 and 3. There are parts where he's out, but then he is a major figure in Better Call Saul. And just Jonathan Banks, man, what a fucking actor. And I love that there are, and he was a character actor who had been around forever and was kind of rediscovered on this show. Bryan Cranston was a guy who was known as a comedian from Malcolm in the Middle, and he becomes Walter fucking White. Aaron Paul came out of nowhere. His most famous thing was he was on Wheel of Fortune back in the day, and that's an amazing clip. If you've never seen Aaron Paul on Wheel of Fortune, nobody has ever been more excited than Aaron Paul was getting called up by Bob Barker. Just talking about game shows. Yeah, I love these shows, and I am very, very excited to be watching El Camino in just a couple weeks. I like that they did not tease that like years in advance. They're just like, oh, we made it. It's coming in a month. It's great.
Yeah, and the most recent trailer for that, which is like a proper trailer, not like the teaser thing they originally did. The proper trailer for it makes it look really good. Like, I am now really excited to watch that one.
Oh yeah,
because I assume I'll just be able to watch that without having seen Better Call Saul, because it's just Breaking Bad stuff.
Yeah. It's just a direct sequel to the finale. They're pretty clear about that.
Yeah, so I'll probably just pick that up when that comes out.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's good stuff. As you say, the Vigatu. Good shit. Keep it going.
Hashtag Vigatu. Let's get it trending. That was my number 8. What's your number 8, Sean?
My number 8 is, this is one of the TV shows that I have not said anything about, have not intimated that I have seen. This is not an obscure TV show. Everyone's heard of it. Just nobody knows that I've seen it, and that's HBO's Deadwood.
This is so weird. This is the rare HBO show that I have never watched. I want to so badly. It seems like I would love it. Somehow I never have, and now you've lapped me on it, Sean.
Yep. So this is going to start a block. Like 8, 7, and 6 are all shows that this is true for. Of a few years ago, again, like after graduating from Boulder and moving back down with my parents, my dad and I do this thing where we watch Jeopardy after dinner, and then usually we will watch 1 or 2 episodes of some TV show, like some American TV show. And so we've watched a bunch of stuff that way, and Deadwood is one of those. And it's mostly like me filling in a lot of gaps of like really famous, well-known, critically acclaimed Western TV shows that I just completely missed because I just had never watched them. And at the point where I would have watched them, I got really into anime, and I didn't have time to watch them. But being able to watch like 2 episodes a night with my dad is like, that's the good for, especially for a show like Deadwood. That is the right pace to watch Deadwood. Like, is a show that you probably want to and like feel the pull to absolutely binge it. You should not binge it. Like 2 episodes, 1 or 2 episodes a night is the right pace. Since we've never talked about it on the podcast, there's probably people know about it, but just to set it up. So Deadwood is a show that ran from 2004 to 2006 on HBO. So it originally ran for 3 seasons. Earlier this year, it got a TV movie, Deadwood the Movie, that kind of concludes everything, and they brought everybody back, everyone who's live. A couple of the actors had passed away in the intervening years, and that movie is also great. Like, this would be on my list regardless of the movie, but the movie is also like probably one of the best movies that will be released this year. It's just an HBO movie that's a conclusion to a TV show, so it's not going to get the accolades it actually deserves. But yeah, so it's a Western set in the late 19th century in the town, the actual historical town of Deadwood, which was a town built up in South Dakota, basically because there was gold in them hills, and so they were going to prospect the gold in the hills, and so this little trading outpost started up, and then slowly people kind of started congregating together and created a makeshift community in what we now call South Dakota, what was a territory and was not a state at that point. So the show is sort of half based on history, like most of the specific events that the show dramatizes are not historical, but most of the characters in the setting are. And so in the first episode, you meet Timothy Oliphant, who plays Seth Bullock, who is a historical figure that became the sheriff of the Deadwood County. And you kind of follow him as he comes into the Deadwood town. With his partner, and they set up a hardware store, and then kind of he, as an ex-lawman from another town, slowly kind of gets pulled into the community, and over the course of the first season becomes the sheriff of Deadwood. And you meet all your other characters, principal among them, the most famous character from Deadwood being Al Swearingen, played by the great Ian McShane. And Al Swearingen is basically the owner of the Gym Saloon. And he is the guy who kind of controls all of the illicit, illegal activities in the town. And he's sort of secretly in control of how the town operates, at least certainly for season 1. And over the course of the show, his authority gets challenged in different ways. But the thing that makes Deadwood so good, there's a couple of things. One is the quality purely of the writing. This is a show created by, and many of the episodes scripted by David Milch, who just incredible scriptwriter. He also did like NYPD Blue, shows like that. So just like great TV writer. And the writing for Deadwood is like the most foul-mouthed Shakespeare you can possibly imagine. It's so gorgeous, the dialogue. And by like Shakespeare, I mean literally there are soliloquies in the show. There's a character, E.B. Farnham, who straight up soliloquizes like to no character in particular, more or less to the camera. And there are long, big, ponderous speeches about like morality and the things going on in the town, all filtered through the perspective of these very like harsh, rough and tumble characters that use, all kinds of profanity that would, make you blush. Because it is the dialogue is very creative on that side of things. And so the writing is always so sharp. The dialogue is always so rich and textured and multi-layered. And then that writing is filtered through these incredibly rich characters. So Deadwood, as a show, the main thing that makes it function is, and kind of my thesis for the show, is that it is the most effective, comprehensive, powerful representation of a community in a TV show I've ever seen. Because the show is called Deadwood for a good reason. It is not about any individual character. There is no protagonist of the show. Like, you can't easily put Seth Bullock or Al Swearingen in like a protagonist-antagonist kind of slot. There are characters that kind of occupy the antagonist slot, but no one character is your main character that you follow through. It is really a true, proper ensemble. And so the episodes are always themed around events and how they affect the community as a whole, not just individual characters or groups of characters. And so especially the main kind of linchpin episodes of each season are focused around like remarkable acts of violence and showing you how those acts of violence are viewed by different members of the community and then how they differently affect members of the community. And so Deadwood is a show that more than anything else is able to leverage a feature that I think is fairly unique to television style writing, which is exploring a fully faceted, like multi-dimensional community type setting that moves far beyond individual characters or groups of characters into something much broader and becomes really truly about the setting. And so that is the thing about Deadwood, and I think the reason why it has this incredibly intense cultish following is because you get so invested into the internal politics and workings of this very strange frontier, like Old West community. And you just get so wrapped up in the characters. For our two main leads, like the two most prominent characters, Seth Bullock and Al Swearingen, one dynamic between the two of them that is so fascinating is they are these really, really well drawn out mirror characters, where Seth Bullock is your sheriff, and so he's the guy who you're supposed to kind of look to be the moral center of the show. And he is a guy who is always trying to do the right thing and projects really powerful morality and is like very kind of absolutist in his moral perspective, but he also has this just like incredible deep built-in rage and anger that at various points in the show just utterly explodes, and he just multiple times he just beats the shit out of people in a way that like makes you legitimately scared of him. That he's a character that at the drop of a pin, if someone pushes his buttons in the wrong way, he will just completely go off and just destroy somebody in a way that is frightening. But he's supposed to be your moral center. And then you have Al Swearingen, a man who kills, robs, steals. He runs a brothel. He's not a moral person in the slightest, and he is fine and like is happy to have people see him as this villain. But as you see more of him, you understand just how much of like his actions in the show are driven by an intense love for the community that has sprung up around Deadwood, and him being this like true kind of leader and figure at the head of that community, driving things forward. And so while he is an awful person that does awful things, he like what he does always comes from this like legitimate place of love. And that contrast between those two leads is so powerfully written and portrayed by the two actors. that is like true throughout all 3 seasons of Deadwood. Deadwood is not a show that at any point like has an off episode or lags. It's not an episode that needs to or it's not a show that needs to pick up steam. It like hits the ground running immediately. It is solid all the way through. The movie is fantastic and wraps things up perfectly. And if I had to point out one episode that is my favorite episode from Deadwood, it would be episode 4 of season 1, Here Was a Man, which is the end of the kind of a 4-part episode, like story arc involving Wild Bill Hickok, played by I think it's Keith Carradine. I always get the Carradine
It's Keith
brothers
Carradine,
mixed
yeah.
up. Yeah, Keith Carradine, which is the best version of Hickok that has ever been played. Like, there have been some good ones, but he's so good. And he's playing a man who is like at the end of a rope and like knows his time has come. And, you know, like historically, Hickok moved to the Deadwood town, and then during a poker game was shot in the back of the head because he had his back to the door. And so episode 4 dramatizes the events of Hickok's death. And so you have 4 episodes with this guy who is like a historical legend, a legend of the West at the end of his life, and then seeing him be killed. And this is like one of those acts of extraordinary violence that kind of ties the whole community together in a like visual and narrative way that is incredibly impactful. And the whole way that that episode is dramatized and structured to lead you to that conclusive moment where this man that anybody who knows anything about the history of the setting knows is going to die soon. The way they leverage that historical perspective to create the tragedy and drama and relate it to all of their other characters in the show, it's just some of the best I've ever seen that storytelling trick be done. And so that is Deadwood. It's fantastic. People who have not gotten around to watching it, which was me for a very long time, it is as good as people say. Like, it is truly phenomenal. It is among the best shows. If you have any love for Westerns and big, flowery, ridiculous speeches, this is a show that you should go to. And also, if you have any love for Ian McShane, this is 100% is a show you need to go to, because this is the most Ian McShane that Ian McShane will ever be able to be, and it is fucking glorious.
Yeah, you know, when I said I hadn't seen Deadwood, that's not entirely true. I have seen the pilot of Deadwood 3 times. So I know the pilot really well. And something has happened where I'm not able to keep watching the show. The most recent time, Sean, was at the start of the summer. I was 100% planning on finally watching all of Deadwood over the summer because I wanted to make sure I had seen it for this top 10 TV shows list, because it is the show I have not seen that I was most certain I would love. And then a little thing called Mobile Suit Gundam came into my life. Sean, the night before I watched the premiere of Mobile Suit Gundam, I watched the pilot of Deadwood again. And then Gundam happened. And I have not watched any other shows but Gundam ever since.
Oh, that's great. I mean, because, you know, spoilers, if this was an anime list, Gundam would be higher than Deadwood.
Yeah.
Like, Deadwood's good. It's not Mobile Suit Gundam, but yeah, that is very, very funny that I completely derailed for you again.
But
being able to watch Deadwood,
it's okay. But it really is. It's been a comedy of errors where I can go to the points in my life where I've tried watching Deadwood and then something distracts me. I know that first episode really well. I think it's got the best opening of any HBO show. The first scene with the hanging and everything is like the best thesis statement I think a show has ever made, or an American show. And Sean, I'm not going to let us get out of this without reading at least one Deadwood quote. So I'm just going to go with one I know that's from the premiere. And this is where there's the prospector Ellsworth, who's at Al Swearengen's bar, and he's drinking.
Oh, Ellsworth's so good.
I tell you what, I may have fucked up my life flatter and hammered shit, but I stand here before you today beholden to no human cocksucker and holding a workin' fucking gold claim, and not the U.S. government saying I'm trespassing, or the savage fucking red man himself, or any of these limber dick cocksuckers passing themselves off as prospectors had better try and stop me. That is poetry. Profane,
it's so good.
Racist, amazing fucking poetry.
Here, I will read one. This is from the end of the show. It doesn't look like there should be any spoilers in this. This is an Al Swearengen speech, which is very good. This is not a spoiler. He is saying, so in season 3, Al Swearengen has there's a Native American that is killed in season 1, and Al Swearengen has his decapitated head. The whole event of like why he would want this like head for like political reasons, basically. And he has the head in the box, and so he starts giving his speeches to the head in the box, and it's very good. This fucking place is going to be a fucking misery. Every fucking one of them, every fucking time I walk by. Ooh, how could you? How could you? With their big fucking cow eyes. The entire fucking gaggle of them is going to have to bleed and quit before we can even hope for peace. What's the fucking alternative? I ain't fucking killing her that sat nights with me sick and taking slaps to her mug that were some less than fucking fair. I should have fucking learned to use a gun, but I'm too fucking entrenched in my ways. And you ain't exactly the one to be leveling criticisms on the score of being slow to adapt. You fucking people are the original slow fucking learners.
So good.
It's so good. What a fucking show.
All right. Moving on from a show about the birth of a community and a society to a show about a utopian vision of a society. My number 7 is Star Trek: The Next Generation. From 1987 to 1994, starring, of course, the great Patrick Stewart as Captain Jean-Luc Picard. And this is one of 2 shows on my list that would be one you haven't heard about yet. That would be the first 2 TV shows I ever fell in love with. And I can't even quite remember how... No, you know what? I can remember when I got into Star Trek The Next Generation. I would have been 9 or 10. It was when Star Trek Nemesis came out, the last Next Generation movie. My dad loved Star Trek, and he went to see it, and he told me about it, and I'm like, I've never seen this Star Trek thing. So he started showing me The Next Generation, and this was back when Netflix was doing DVDs, and we rented most of The Next Generation in DVD form over the years and watched a lot of it that way. And then it was also, of course, in reruns on all sorts of different stations. So I have been a Star Trek fan my whole life, or not my whole life, but since then. And I have particularly been a fan of The Next Generation. I think, there are things about the original series that are certainly better. I would say the best overall season of Star Trek is still probably the first season of the original series, if you just count the hits, But I think The Next Generation has a scope and a breadth to it that I love even more. And I think while The Next Generation could be a very hit or miss show, like I'm not one of the people who says seasons 1 and 2 are terrible, but seasons 1 and 2 are very hit or miss. So are like the other end of the show, like 6 and 7. When The Next Generation is good, and when it is on to its like best self degree, I genuinely think American TV has pretty much never been better. My favorite episode of TNG is The Best of Both Worlds, the 2-parter that concludes season 3 and then starts season 4, where Captain Picard gets Borgified, but it is really a story about Commander Riker and his attempts to deal with the problems of leadership and the perils of command. And I think The Best of Both Worlds is as good an episode of TV as anything on this list that we will talk about. I think The Best of Both Worlds is the best Star Trek thing. I think it's better than any Star Trek movie. I think it's better than any other Star Trek episode. And I just think I have seen that episode so many fucking times in my life. We owned it on VHS. We had it on DVD. I have it on Blu-ray now. I have seen it in a theater. I love The Best of Both Worlds. I know exactly what happens in that episode. And every time I am still on the edge of my fucking seat. If you want to study how to create tension and stakes and resolve in an episode or in a story, The Best of Both Worlds, which is by Michael Piller, who was the best writer on TNG. He was the showrunner seasons 3, 4, 5, and that's the best period of the show, and he did a lot of the best scripts. Michael Piller, who died young, tragically, and he went on also to create Deep Space Nine, which is also I have not seen Deep Space Nine. Obviously, people love that, and I would love to watch it someday. But yeah, Michael Piller was great, and The Best of Both Worlds is as good as it gets. But, you could just list episode after episode after episode of Star Trek TNG. I think the best season of the show is the 3rd season. Season 3 of TNG is just an absolute embarrassment of riches, and there are points where you're just going... hit, masterpiece, hit. Let me bring up the episode list here for myself because there are so many that I could list off. But basically, once you get into the point where, once you have the Defector episode, You have Deja Q. There's this run that is Deja Q, which is my favorite Q episode, other than probably the finale, All Good Things. But Deja Q is where he comes in and he's been stripped of his Q powers and it has to be a human for a little while. There is the Matter of Perspective episode, which is one of their mini legal drama episodes. It's where Riker is accused of murdering a scientist. And there is it's sort of a Rashomon style story. That one is phenomenal. Then Yesterday's Enterprise, which is the one that is about the alternate universe where Tasha Yar is still alive. That one is obviously one of the most famous episodes. It's got the clip where Picard says, "Let's make sure no one ever forgets the name Enterprise," that is used in every clip reel about Star Trek. The one after that is the episode called The Offspring, which is where Data creates a child for himself called Lal, and if you can keep it together through the end of this episode, you are a stronger person than I am. That one also is an example. Michael Piller created a policy that has never really been done before or since, where he solicited scripts from the fandom for TNG, and The Offspring was an episode they just got from a viewer and made very minor tweaks to, and it becomes one of the best episodes. And Michael Piller did that through his run, and some of the best stuff came from just opening it up to spec scripts. The one after that is Sins of the Father, which is the famous episode about Worf, and his father has been accused of treason, and so he is going to try to clean his father's name. That is the best Klingon episode, I think, in Star Trek lore, and TNG really chases the hit of Sins of the Father for a long time. Season 4 of TNG kind of has a lightly serialized story about a civil war in the Klingon Empire, and there's a lot of really good stuff there, but it's never as good as Sins of the Father. A couple episodes later, you get Captain's Holiday, which is the one where Picard goes on holiday and basically gets into a Uncharted video game. Basically, he meets an archaeologist and they go on an Indiana Jones adventure. It's great. You have, I think it's the Most Toys, which is an episode about Data getting kidnapped by a scientist, or not a scientist, a collector who just obsessively collects interesting things. And that has the darkest, most bitter Star Trek ending I've ever seen, where Data basically murders someone and then lies about it, and it is so cold-blooded. I've never seen Star Trek be that cold-blooded, and I love it. The one after that is Sarek, where you have, they couldn't get Leonard Nimoy, so they got the guy who played Sarek, and it is an episode basically about Alzheimer's and dealing with a family member with a degenerative mental disorder, but they do it through the lens of Sarek and the emotions of Vulcan culture. And then a couple episodes after that, you have The Best of Both Worlds Part 1, which goes into Season 4, and you have just an incredible run after that. Really, the Season 3-4 run is out of this world, and then Season 5 has phenomenal stuff too, including Season 5 near the end gets to The Inner Light, which is another one of the great Star Trek episodes. That's where Picard lives an entire life in this kind of fantasy realm, and it's the whole thing with the flute. Season 6 has the Chain of Command two-parter, where Picard is tortured, and it deals with all of that. It has the other best Q episode, Tapestry, where Q basically shows Picard his life at this juncture where Picard had a very a near-fatal heart injury. And then, of course, Season 7 ends with All Good Things, which is probably, to me, the best series finale I've ever seen in American television. And it helps that Star Trek is not serialized, so they didn't have to, stick the landing. But All Good Things, if you're just judging by the quality of an episode TV series that was also a final episode, I don't think it gets better than All Good Things. And I could gush about this show for hours. When it is on, like I said, it is as good as it gets. There are bad episodes, but you can skip those now. That's one of the great things about the way TV works today, is you can just jump around and I think, Sean, Netflix at some point, they haven't done it yet, but they announced plans to introduce a randomizer where it would throw you to a random episode. I really want that on Netflix. That would be great for shows like The X-Files and Star Trek and The Office, because that's how we watched them growing up, it would be random, and I loved that. I loved that about Star Trek. I would totally pay for that feature, to just randomize an episode of Star Trek for me. And part of why it works, I think TNG worked so well for so much longer, because the original series is great, but it's really only one great season, a pretty good season, and then a very bad season for the original series. TNG is up and down, but consistently pretty good from Season 3 to the end. And I think a big part of that is TNG the original series is a great core 3-person cast. The other people that you love from the original series, like Sulu and Uharu, am I saying that right? I don't know. But anyway, I don't know the original series as well. Those characters really only come into their own in the movies, right?
Wait, were you trying to say Uhura?
What did I say? Uharu? I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uhuru.
I couldn't, like, it was so off, I didn't know who you were talking about.
Sorry.
So
or Scotty or any of those guys. I would say they really only come into their own in the movies. The TNG cast, though, is big right off the bat, and I love most of the TNG characters, other than Wesley, who can go shove a fucking stick up his ass and get the fuck off my ship. Everyone else is pretty great. And so you can have a lot of episodes about Picard, because Picard is a singularly compelling character, but Riker is a really great character. And I think, and then you have Data, who is obviously just a wealth of great stories. And you have Geordie LaForge, who is often pretty boring, but when you get him in a good place, you can get a really good story out of him. Or Deanna Troi, who is, I think, a little unfairly shit on, because she is the subject of a lot of bad Star Trek stories. But there are also some really good Deanna Troi stories that you couldn't tell with a different character. Or Dr. Crusher, or you could just go on and on. The main cast and the different permutations of it work so well. It is also like the platonic ideal for me of the naval show in space, where it is just a crew of competent people commanding a vessel basically like it's a naval ship in the fucking 1700s, complete with a dude just sipping tea in his office because he's the captain. And it's my bullshit, and I love it. And if you've never seen Star Trek TNG, maybe don't try to binge all 177 episodes, but look at the list of the best ones and then just go watch some of them, because they are phenomenal. And then don't ever watch the movies, because they were not good. First Contact's okay. The other ones you don't need to watch. But yeah, that's Star Trek TNG. I love it.
Yeah, there's no Star Trek on my list, partially just because it's been so long since I watched most of TNG, and part of it is that we talked about this before on the show, that I have my sick compulsion that I need to watch things linearly through.
Yeah.
And so season 1 of TNG is not horrible, but
it's rough.
Is not. Yeah, it's not it doesn't do a good job of making you want to watch the next episode. So it's each episode is fine, at least generally, but it is not something that's kind of pushing you to be man, that was awesome, I want to watch another one of these.
Season 1 is the most Wesley-focused season, because Season 1 is almost set up as a kid's show, where Wesley is the POV, and that just fundamentally did not work, and it culminates in an episode where Wesley accidentally walks on the grass on a planet where it's a capital offense to walk on the grass. And I hate that episode, because I am rooting the whole time for Picard to just say, look, Prime Directive, there's nothing I can do, and just let Wesley get killed, and then the show would be so much better. But Picard's like, no, I'm going to save my friend's kid. Yeah, stupid good captain. Could have just let the kid die. Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, but TNG is fantastic. Once you get to the good episodes, it is, it is, as with any of those kinds of shows, it is going to end up being that kind of mixed bag thing of TNG lives and dies by the quality of individual episodes, is the kind of show it is, and especially early on when they had not fully figured it out and kind of fully figured out their cast, it gets very rough. When it gets good, it's very, very good. The original series did not quite make it on my list, but if I were to have one, the original series is close, because that is, for me, that is my Star Trek. That is what I hew most closely to. That is what I am most fond of. But it is good to have some Star Trek representation, because Star Trek is good.
It is.
But it's good. It's very, very good.
Oh, absolutely. And I also want to give a quick shout out to something that I think is an undersung element of TNG. It is a show with phenomenal music. The score in TNG is under-celebrated, particularly the episodes done by a composer named Ron Jones, who has later gone on and done lots of other work. I think he's the composer on Family Guy, or one of them, and Family Guy, it obviously is a very up and down comedy, but when they do musical things, it's great, because Ron Jones is a genius. And he did the score for Best of Both Worlds, but also a lot of other ones. They kind of had a rotating cast of composers, and they are big, beautiful cinematic scores for television, and they're amazing. And I think it was starting in season 5, they fired Ron Jones because his scores were too expensive, and there is something the show never gets back without that level of composing. but at its best, the music on... I mean, who can forget the cue that ends Best of Both Worlds, leading up to Mr. Worf Fire? It's the best cliffhanger in TV history, and it's like 50% the music, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, just wanted to shout that out. All right, so that is my number 8. My number 7? Let's hear yours, Sean.
My number 7 is another in my trilogy of shows that I have never talked about that I have watched. This show, maybe some people have heard of the show and know it's supposed to be good. My number 7 is HBO's The Sopranos.
You woke up this morning, got yourself a gun. Your mama always said you'd be the chosen one. She said, one in a million, you got to burn the shine. You were born under a bad sign with a blue moon in your eye. And you woke up this morning, all that love had gone. Your papa never told you about right.
I watched it. It's fucking really good. The Sopranos. It's like Citizen Kane or whatever. It's like you hear people talk about like, hey, this is like one of the best TV shows ever made. And you're like, is it really though? And then you're watching like, yeah, no, okay, yeah. Everyone turns out, fucking like every TV critic had been right for a long time. Sopranos is just really fucking good. It's just a really fucking good TV show. Like I don't know how much there is to say about that hasn't been said. It ran from 1999 to 2007. It ran for 6 seasons. It is just like, I mean, it is where you see where so much modern American television does sort of hew itself from the Sopranos model, but like nothing else I have seen really kind of does it quite the way the Sopranos did, because the Sopranos is an interesting balance of a lot of different elements and genres. It is, on the most surface level, it is very obviously, it is a mob story. You're following Tony Soprano, who over the course of the first season becomes the head of the Soprano crime family in the mafia. And then it's him, following him as he's the leader of this mob family throughout those 6 seasons. And all of the mob stuff is fantastic and is as good as any, The Godfather or Goodfellas or any kind of mob thing. If you're into that, you will love The Sopranos. But it also is like one part that and one part a sitcom. And it is the sitcom part of it that is, I think, for me, always the most interesting part. Because it's both about Tony being, part of the mob, but it's also about him being a father and a husband. And which is something that a lot of these shows do. Like, that is nominally part of what Breaking Bad is. But past season 1, Breaking Bad doesn't really focus on that. Sopranos
because
does.
Walter White never really cared about his family, and Tony Soprano does.
Yes, exactly. So, and that's one of the things that makes Tony Soprano such a fascinating character, is that he is an anti-hero. Like, he's a bad guy. He fucking murders people. He's got some very severe anger issues. Kind of like Seth Bullock in Deadwood. You say the wrong thing, you push the wrong button with Tony Soprano, and he will just straight up fucking beat you to death with his bare hands. That's the kind of guy he is, and he's awful. But unlike a slightly more, what feels like an often kind of slightly more cartoonish or characterized perspective of a character like that, like Walter White in Breaking Bad, not to say that that's bad, but it's like like Breaking Bad is a more pulpy kind of show. The Sopranos gives you a much more kind of complicated space to kind of understand Tony, because he does love his children. He does love his wife. Like, I believe Tony when he says that most of the stuff he does is for his family. And that is like, it is the kind of traditional patriarchal American and Italian American like values that have been passed down to him. I think he earnestly as a person really believes in those and is trying his best to uphold them, which is not true about Walter White. Like, Walter White uses that constantly as an excuse to just do whatever selfish bullshit that he wants to do. And Breaking Bad is a show that knows that and interrogates that, and that is the character they're concerned with. The Sopranos deals with a much messier character in Tony, and that the way they use the like filmic and language and like dialogue stylings of sitcoms, where the home set of Tony's house is just like, you could watch like 5 to 10 minutes of a scene that's just set in the home and think you're like watching a really well directed like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air or something like that. Like, it is the same kind of set that is shot in the same kind of way and often has the same kind of dialogue, just without any like pauses for laugh tracks or anything. Like The Sopranos is oftentimes a very, very funny show. And the balance of those two elements I find always so fascinating in the way that The Sopranos is able to explore both elements of its main character and use the kind of genre trappings of the family sitcom and the genre trappings of the mob story simultaneously, and blend them in such that you often can't quite see the seams, and they, both styles blend into each other. And so that kind of genre blending is one of the things that I did, like, having heard a lot about The Sopranos was not something I had much of a conception of that the show did. Is one of the things that like really kind of like took me aback when I actually got around to watching it, because like with Deadwood, this is the same thing where I watched like 2 episodes a night with my dad. It is a show that is phenomenally directed at all times. Like, it is as well produced and like constructed a show as you could possibly ask for. It is constantly doing really fascinating things with its thematic work, and its thematic work in pairing parallel plot lines together. Like, this is one of those shows that you see like, oh, this is where the like A, B, C, D plotline construction that so many Western TV shows do so poorly. Stuff like the Marvel Netflix shows we talk about all the time, as a reference of like, or like 24 is my favorite example of in season 1 where the wife has her fucking amnesia plotline, where it's just like, this is terrible, just utter garbage. You have fucking 45 minutes to fill and only 20 minutes of a script, and so you have to come up with something for this other character to do. The Sopranos never really has that feel to it. It has a big cast of major characters that it will switch to. Every episode has multiple different plot lines and an ABC plot, but all of those plots are always valuable to the episode, and they're always in conversation with one another. And so every episode of The Sopranos is constructed with a primary thematic concern at the top level, and everything is trying to serve whatever that thematic interest that the episode is driving at. And so the best episodes of The Sopranos are kind of unimpeachable because they have that quality to them. They are so focused and laser focused on really kind of trying to dissect issues about like misogyny, patriarchy, and violence and anger in American culture. And the show is as good at investigating those things as anything could be. James Gandolfini's portrayal of Tony Soprano is one of the all-time great TV performances. I'm not the first person to say that, but it is.
And you won't be the last.
Yeah, it is obviously true. Like, it is so obviously, like,
Sean,
head-smackingly true.
Can I just point out there's a really morbid theme to your list so far?
Yeah, go ahead.
Jeopardy! Alex Trebek has cancer and we're all sad about that. Granada Sherlock, Jeremy Brett died young and the show had to be canceled. We're all very sad about that. Deadwood, David Milch currently has Alzheimer's and probably will never write for TV again, which is tragic. The Sopranos, James Gandolfini died like 3 years after it ended and died young, and we lost one of our greatest all-time actors when he probably had a whole nother life's worth of great performances in him. You've got a sad list, my friend.
I do have a, time is sad and history is depressing, and we move through time, and we lose oftentimes our best before they should go. And that is like, and that is part of like the feel of The Sopranos, is it does have that like it especially once you like get like deep into it. It, even when it is heightened as a mob show, it feels like a really honest reflection of American life and the issues of American life, both like very specifically with like our culture and our problems that lie there, but also just like more philosophically. This is a show that the premise set up in the first episode is that you have Tony, violent mob boss who has a panic attack in the first episode and has to start seeing a therapist in 1999, where like even now there are lots and lots and lots of issues with like the perception around mental health and the feel of like that it kind of cuts into someone's masculinity. In 1999, for an Italian American fucking mobster, that would be especially true. And so that right there is such a brilliant premise and a brilliant situation to put your character in, is how do we take this like old school, old world kind of character and archetype and put him into the changing norms and ideas of the like what would become 21st century America, and all the issues that come around with that are the things that The Sopranos is concerned with, while always being a top-notch, like incredible production all the way through, with some of like my favorite characters in any TV show. Like the entire cast is phenomenal. So there are books written about The Sopranos. There are documentaries about The Sopranos. It is a Again, it is like the Citizen Kane of TV shows or of modern American TV shows, or however you want to phrase that kind of statement. And it is one where that reputation, for me, having watched it about 2 years ago at this point, that reputation is 100% thoroughly earned. So I watched it almost basically on the 10-year anniversary is when we started watching The Sopranos. So it is a show that holds up utterly phenomenally well, and is in many ways, for the kind of show it is, based on stuff that I have seen, is not surpassed in that specific style of what it is going for. And if people have not watched The Sopranos, you check it out. It is, it's fucking really good.
Yeah, The Sopranos is pretty much an identical situation for Deadwood with me. I have seen the pilot twice. I have, for whatever reason, never gotten to watch the rest of it, and I really want to. And my plan for the summer was, if I got through Deadwood, I was also going to hit The Sopranos before this list, and then Mobile Suit Gundam hit me, and that wasn't going to happen. Sorry, guys.
Yeah. It's now you know, Jonathan. If you hadn't heard, I'm here to tell you The Sopranos is a good TV show that people should watch because it's good.
Awesome. All right, last TV shows we're talking about today. My number 6, the gayest show we're going to talk about on my list at least, is Hannibal.
The skies tumbling from your eyes, so
From 2013 to 2015
yes.
by Brian Fuller. Have you seen Hannibal yet, Sean?
Yes, I have. Yeah, we talked about it on the podcast
Right.
forever ago when
Okay.
I watched it.
I was trying to think, and maybe this is relevant for Hannibal. Was that a dream or was that an actual podcast discussion? Which is a lot of what Hannibal's about. So, look, Hannibal, it's got a vibrant cult following at this point, shall we say. So you've probably heard a lot about it. But to me, like, I tried to write down some of my thoughts because I think there's so much I love about this show. And to me, it's that it is a sumptuous 3-course meal lecture on the history of American avant-garde filmmaking, done through the course of the boldest and most stylistically daring show in the history of network television, which I think is an objectively true statement, right, Sean? There is nothing network TV has ever attempted that will touch Hannibal. It is so fucking far out there. And it aired 2013 to 2015 because this is a show I watched pilot to finale, like, weekly. And it overlapped with my most fond years at the University of Colorado, learning, which is a very avant-garde film school, learning about a lot of what Hannibal is pulling from and using. And so it defines kind of a time in my life when I think my film tastes and interests were growing and evolving, and Hannibal was over in the corner doing this really, really weird fucking thing, because it is thematically dense and it is gory and bold, but it is also so funny and it is gnarly and it is wildly creative. It is so fucking weird. It is absolutely riveting when it wants to be. It is gay as fuck with how it does Hannibal and Will, and I love that because, Sean, I rewatched the final episode last night to kind of wet my whistle and remind myself, and my only complaint with the 3-year run of Hannibal is that it doesn't end with Will and Hannibal kissing. That is like, and they basically do it because they have them at the end of the show, which I feel comfortable spoiling, is them embracing. They are covered in blood and fluids because they have just murdered a man together. They have murdered Thorin from The Hobbit, and they are covered in blood. They are embracing. They are, like, rubbing their faces against each other. And I have to wonder if the one thing they couldn't get by network TV was having Will and Hannibal just kiss at the end. Because that is one of the goriest scenes in TV history, and the episode before it is where the Red Dragon rips Chilton's lips off, which I will never understand how that got on TV. But you so just want to see them just go for it finally at the end. And they don't quite do it, but they get very close, and then they fall off the cliff together. And I am definitely one of those people who thinks Hannibal ended perfectly. I would watch more if they made it, but I actually think it's for the best that it ended where it did, because I don't know how you could end it better than finally resolving this core tension. There is this will they or won't they with Will and Hannibal. It had to be consummated at some point, and the consummation is not sex, it is violence. And they do their violent consummation. They kill Richard Armitage, but good. They rip that motherfucker apart, and then they embrace in the moonlight, and Will says, you're right, it is beautiful. It does look dark in the moonlight. And Hannibal says, this is all I ever wanted for you, Will. They hug. In my mind, they kiss. And then they go off the cliff together, and it is consummation and negation all at once together, the giving into and the subsequent denial of the temptation. It's where the show always had to go. It's the perfect spot for it to have ended, because in such a weird way, I feel like Hannibal was made on a dare of, can you take the dumbest plot point from the Thomas Harris books, which is that in the third book, Clarice Starling and Hannibal Lecter become lovers and flee together. And it's like, can you take that dumb plot point and make a show about it? And that's kind of what Hannibal is. It's not Clarice, because they couldn't legally use her. It's Will Graham, played by Hugh Dancy, and Hannibal, played by Mads Mikkelsen, the perfect versions of both those characters. And it is a version where you can absolutely, at a certain point, believe the part where the protagonist would just go off and live with Hannibal. But of course, the whole show is about Will not wanting to give into that part of himself. But it is in a weird way about how you can be in love with the things that scare you, with the things that hurt you, with the things that break you. And that love is palpable throughout the show. And it is this, in some ways, it is also a devil show. It is a show about the literal devil, like in Hannibal Lecter, tempting people, and that is so much of what it's about. It can work on that mythical level. It can work on a much more down-to-earth level. It is a phenomenal adaptation of the best Thomas Harris book, Red Dragon, which is one of my favorite novels, and I think even though they only adapt the literal plot of Red Dragon in the third season, the whole show is taking its cues from Red Dragon and what it has to say about Will Graham and sort of the minds of the different killers, and how it becomes, it's not about reality. This is not supposed to be, this show does not claim any verisimilitude to actual, I think, murder patterns or things like that, or even mental health at a certain point. It is so operatic and heightened and avant-garde. And I love all those things about it. It is such a phenomenally well-cast show. Lawrence Fishburne as Jack Crawford is just a treat. It is such a treat. Carolyn DeVernis as Alana Bloom is just a treat every time you see her. But then, there's no better Hannibal than Mads Mikkelsen. It kind of annoys me that people still say Anthony Hopkins is the best Hannibal Lecter. I sort of get it, but Mads Mikkelsen is manifestly a more interesting version of that character in every conceivable way. He is the Hannibal who you believe could be out in the world killing and eating people and getting away with it, but he also works in the operatic, crazy soap opera scope of this show. And then I think Hugh Dancy doesn't get enough credit for being the guy who ties this whole thing together, because his performance as Will Graham, I think, is one for the ages. I would put it on par with Bryan Cranston in Breaking Bad, or some of these other major he's not really an anti-hero, he's more of a straight hero with very dark tendencies, but it's that caliber of performance to me, and I love everything about watching them work. Oh, and I wrote to myself, oh yeah, Gillian Anderson is in this fucking show, and she's crazy good. Love her. And I think it's got the best cinematography of any show we're going to talk about on my list, at least. Maybe the best cinematography in American TV history. Just the way it plays with color and texture and motion, the way it sometimes does slow motion, the way it creates gore in a way that is beautiful. It is all these tableaus of bodies dismembered in these crazy, almost Renaissance painting ways. And you can't believe they got it on network TV, but also it feels like it weirdly belongs in a museum because of how they're treating the gore. It's an insane thing to have done. It is a masterclass in all the different avant-garde film techniques that I learned about, certainly. The first episode of season 3 just straight up opens with an homage to Stan Brakhage, and I love it. And then it's got, I think, an all-timer of a weird atonal musical score by Brian Wrightsell, which just drives every episode. But yeah, I love Hannibal. I love it so much. I think it is one of the most subversive pieces of mainstream media in my lifetime, that this NBC ordered this. They clearly had no idea what they were getting from Brian Fuller. And then Brian Fuller somehow just kept doing his own thing and pushing it in its own direction for 3 seasons. It mostly survived because this show was principally financed by a couple of French companies, including Gaumont. It was also financed by the Dino De Laurentiis company, which you might know from David Lynch's Dune and Blue Velvet. So that is a nice little connection. So NBC basically just licensed the show. They didn't produce it. But it is still that, like, something I think this subversive got on American network television. Nobody fucking watched it while it was airing, but it was on American network television, and it could be this boldly homoerotic, like in the 3rd season when there's that big montage they do of one is a gay sex scene, one is a straight sex scene, but they're doing it as a series of Rorschach images. Just, I think people in the future will be writing books on this show and being like, how the hell was this on American network TV in the 2010s? You guys had a lot of problems. How did you get this on TV? And it's one of the miracles of the modern age of TV. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Hannibal is not on my list because I don't have quite as strong a personal relationship to the show. I think I agree with everything you said. I think it's utterly fucking spectacular. If there's only one criticism I'd level at it, it's less a criticism and more a, like, it's not a particularly good binging show because I think it is so tonally, not flat because it's bad, but it's like very tonally consistent.
Yeah.
Like it's trying to hit the same kind of tonal beat very constantly on Hannibal, which makes it something that, like, you should watch it over, I think, longer periods of time. And that's a show that was not one of the ones I watched with my dad. I just sort of knew you really liked it. I saw it was on Amazon. I'm like, yeah, fuck it, I'll watch Hannibal, and didn't pace myself well. So I'd recommend people watching it for the first time, pace yourself on it. Don't just sort of marathon that show because it doesn't hold up well under that viewing condition. It's much better paced out over a longer period of time.
Yeah, you will hurt yourself watching it all at once because it's just not... Yeah, this is by the way, the weirdest show my mom likes. It is so out of character that my mom likes this show, but she watched the whole damn thing.
Mads Mikkelsen's very good.
Yeah.
He's very, very good.
He was voted multiple times Denmark's sexiest man alive. And, I think Hannibal is proof positive of why. Because the food he makes, I would eat that food. It looks fucking good.
It looks fucking good. And Mads Mikkelsen, like, is the thing that makes me most excited about Death Stranding. Every time I see a trailer and, like, oh, right, there's, like, a weirdly photorealistic CG model of Mads Mikkelsen in this game. Great. Like, I am probably going to hate most of what this game is, but I will like it every single time this dude's on screen because he's really fucking good, and it looks like he's basically just playing Hannibal.
Yep. I mean, he's one of the best James Bond villains. He's the best Hannibal. He is an actor for the ages. Love him. So that's my number 6, Sean. What's the last show we're going to talk about today?
The last show, I'm glad we're going to talk about this as the last show because it is a very unexpected show. It's the end of my trilogy of shows that people have probably heard of, but had no idea that I had seen. And a show that I think also is not a show that almost anybody would put in a list above Deadwood or The Sopranos, but it is something I feel fairly strongly about. My number 6 is FX's Justified.
On this lonely road, trying to make it home, doing it by my lonesome, pissed off who won't son. I'm fighting for my soul, God, get at your boy. You try to go, God, fall back, I go hard. On this lonely road, trying to make it home, doing it by my lonesome, pissed off who won't son. I see them long, hard times to come.
Also starring Timothy Olyphant from Deadwood. Justified is a show that, like, is definitely well regarded. Like, it's won a couple of Emmys. Like, it is done well. But it has never gotten, like, a substantial amount of critical acclaim. Like, certainly not compared to something like a Breaking Bad in the modern TV era. And I feel very, very strongly that Justified is a much better show than Breaking Bad. I like Breaking Bad. It is not as good as Justified. Justified is a show that is sort of loosely based in some Elmore Leonard novels and short stories. He's sort of like a Western-style writer, and they take the character Raylan Givens, who's in some of his books, and they base the show around him. So the pilot is loosely based on the short story Fire in the Hole. From that point, the show kind of goes and does its own thing with this character. Raylan Givens is played by Timothy Olyphant. The show was spanned from 2010 to 2015, which is important context because it kind of comes out of that big boom from around that period of like all the CSI spinoffs and NCIS and all that kind of stuff. And so season 1 of Justified feels like it's sort of camouflaged as like a sheep or like a wolf in sheep's clothing. And it's like with all these other sheep in these like kind of schlocky police procedural shows, and it kind of looks like that at first blush in season 1, and then slowly you realize that that is not at all what this show is. So it follows Raylan Givens, who is a U.S. Marshal. In the first episode, he's stationed in Miami. He gives this Miami drug lord an ultimatum: either you get out of town or I'm going to shoot you, which is not something a U.S. Marshal is supposed to do. And the Miami drug lord kind of calls his bluff. So the first scene is Raylan Givens going up to this like beautiful kind of like beachside table with this drug lord sitting there. He sits down at the table and says, "Are we really going to do this?" The drug lord's like, "Man, you're not going to shoot me." And then the guy goes for a gun. Raylan just pulls his gun from his hip and fires and kills him in one shot. And then because he has just murdered a man, basically on the job, he is transferred to Kentucky, where he is from. And he never wanted to go back to Kentucky because that is where his family is from, and he has an incredibly toxic relationship with his father, who is a criminal and has mental health issues, and like all this kind of shit that went on with him as a kid in Kentucky, that the reason why he joined the Marshals is to get out. So he's pulled back into the town as to sort of like meet with his family and all the people that he used to know from the town, and kind of solve crimes as a U.S. Marshal and deal with the criminal population of this weird sort of these different areas in Kentucky. Principally among them is a character named Boyd Crowder, played by Walton Goggins, who in the pilot was originally meant to be a character that is killed at the end of the pilot. But Walton Goggins gives such an incredible performance that they decided, we can't fucking kill this dude. This dude has got to stick around. So he survives the gunshot wound from the end of the pilot, and he is a recurring character over the course of the first season. And then from season 2 all the way to season 6, the last season, he is the co-lead of the show. And so the show becomes about, on the one hand, you following Raylan as he is dealing with whatever the kind of the villain of the season is, because each season is focused on a different big bad in a kind of Buffy-esque way. And so you follow him on that path, and then you're also following Boyd Crowder, played by Walton Goggins, as he is trying to build up the Crowder family like crime empire that is kind of defeated by the end of season 1. And so he's kind of on his path becoming an outlaw. Raylan is on his path as the sheriff. And so it's this kind of classic cowboy western, but set in 2010 to 2015 in the Midwest, sort of like / south of Kentucky. And it is dealing with a lot of sort of like classic Western themes, but at the same time, because of its setting, it is also dealing with a lot of the kind of like socioeconomic and political themes that are things that, you know, shortly after Justified came off the air, were things that became very, very important in 2016 in terms of how we end up with Trump as our president. And so Justified is actually, of these three, is the most recent of Deadwood, Sopranos, and Justified. This is the one I most recently watched. And right now in 2019, it feels like people should have been fucking paying attention to Justified, because it shines a light on the kinds of bigotry and issues and kind of myopic fear and anger of those kinds of communities after the economic recession, and the kind of stuff that makes them go to someone who is clearly not actually working for their interests, and is telling them a good story that they want to hear, but they're still going to back them up because they're afraid and because they're angry, and they're like the, you know, the angry white middle class voter thing that like there's a million New York Times fucking bullshit, you know, op-eds about. Justified is about that, and it is about like Boyd Crowder being a guy who can be very theatrical and tell a good story in a very like sort of preacher kind of way. He like, there's a lot of stuff about religion and what religion can do to people in the show as well, and they choose to follow this guy Boyd Crowder at various points because he's manipulating them and playing to their insecurities about things that are real issues, but that also causes like that group of like the people of Kentucky to kind of lose sight of what is probably most important and what they should be moving towards. And so those larger thematic and kind of political things that are at the heart of Justified, I think, are so interesting and so much better done than I feel like the show got credit for while it was airing, and were much more important, clearly, than what the show got credit for while it was airing. But then also at the same time, it is a kick-ass Western. Like, it is, like, Timothy Olyphant as Raylan Givens is, like, an all-time great hero character in TV. His performance as Seth Bullock in Deadwood is very good, but it is sometimes, you can kind of feel that he's, like, not fully confident as an actor yet. But coming out of Deadwood and moving into Justified, it is such a confident, powerful performance. It is like this really relaxed, funny performance. Like, Raylan Givens is a hilarious motherfucker in this deadpan way that is so great. The show is constantly really funny. And he's a character that you love to follow on his adventures and see what he gets up to. And then the same thing with Boyd Crowder. He is also a character that, like, is so magnetic, such a charismatic performance by Walton Goggins that you always want to see, what the fuck is Boyd Crowder going to do now? Like, how is he's going to get out of this, like, pickle? How is he going to deal with this situation? Because oftentimes the Raylan Givens character and the Boyd Crowder character, while they are both co-protagonists effectively, they oftentimes don't intersect over the course of a season. And it's only in brief scenes that they kind of come together and have to deal with something. And it's always those moments that kind of pin a season together. But they let those kind of parallel storylines oftentimes just go off and do their own thing, which is a very satisfying pace for the story to move at. They have these two co-leads that are so great, so confident, so really interesting opposite sides of the core thematic issues that would be able to hold episodes entirely on their own, and you would never kind of like miss a beat. It is a phenomenally directed show. It's got great fucking music. It's a show that every season is better than the previous one, and season 6 in particular is fucking amazing because Sam Elliott plays the big bad in season 6, and it is fucking glorious. I don't know if I've ever seen Sam Elliott play a villain in anything else, but he is very, very good at it. And it has one of my all-time favorite season or like series finales. The end of Justified is an all-timer for me. I think they play the tension of whether or not Raylan would be able to survive this situation so masterfully in such a way that, like, it feels constantly like this is a show that either Raylan could die or he could live, and they walk that tightrope so finely, and the conclusion they come to with that is so perfect. The final scene of Justified is as succinct and powerful a thematic statement that any show could make about its primary thematic concerns. And the build up, like, it is a show that got to do its full 6 seasons run. It feels like a show that was just designed to run for this exact length of time, and it fucking nails it at the end. And the show is good all the way throughout, but that season 6, and particularly the last episode, which is, I think, the best episode of the show, like, elevates it in my memory to this totally other level. Is a show that is always entertaining. It's got great action. It's got great comedy, but it is also operating on those thematic levels at the same level of sophistication as, I think, a Deadwood or The Sopranos. It's just doing it in a genre that people, I think, don't expect it from, and in many ways that makes it all the better.
Awesome. Justified is another one that I've always wanted to watch. I never have watched any of it. When it was airing, I know you say, like, it didn't have huge swaths of critical acclaim. The critics I follow all loved this show, so yeah. I heard about it a lot. I know character actress Margot Martindale tore shit up in season 2, and she won an Emmy for that.
She's so good. Yeah, she's the big bad of season 2, Mags Bennett, which is just an all-time great character. Because that is one thing to know about Justified is I think the first half of season 1 is very inconsistent because that's where it feels like they're not sure how much of a police procedural the show is supposed to be. So there's too many kind of one-off episodes that are fine, but are like just like this is like a really, really amazing example of a kind of episode that you'd expect more from an NCIS or a CSI or something like that. Then halfway through season 1 is where they kind of settle on how good Boyd Crowder is. And that's when the show really kicks in. And then season 2, when they introduce Mags Bennett as the big bad of season 2, it's like, okay, no, this show is something fucking next level, great stuff. Again, it hits a similar level of Breaking Bad to me, of like hitting that like kind of pulpy entertainment with like really deep thematic analysis stuff at the same time. So Justified is fucking great. Like, people need to watch that show.
Awesome. And I don't think anyone involved in it has died a tragic death yet. So it's a good one to end on. Sean, I love this. You have seen way more 21st century American television than I thought.
Yeah, again, it is like, it's literally all these are things I've seen in like the past 2 to 3 years.
Nice.
It's like, hey, I have this opportunity. now I can sit down and fucking watch these TV shows, and they are, turns out, American TV can be good too. You just have to watch it.
Yes. So I think this is a good place to stop. You've heard about 10 different shows so far because we have not had any overlap yet. I think we're going to have some overlap, but we'll see. But that's for...
I think I'm going to predict there's going to be 2 shows that overlap, and that's it. Because I do not see any other ones overlapping.
I think there's 2, and I think we know the 2, and I think we know where they're coming. So
yes,
that'll be next week. For now, this has been podcast 300. But there is, of course, more to come. I think it's good for a big milestone to leave you wanting more because we're not done. Here's to the next... I'm not going to say 300. Let's say the next 50. Let's look that far, Sean.
Yeah, let's set the bar somewhere in height.
Yeah.
Next time on the Weekly Stuff podcast, maybe we go for 50 more. Maybe we go for more than that. We'll at least give you the rest of these fucking lists next time on the Weekly Stuff podcast. What could number 5 be? Let's find out.